Good evening, everybody. Jim Ferrier from COPA. We're just waiting for things to start up here, so we'll be getting going in just a minute. Just a little bit of housekeeping to start while we're waiting. Agenda starting off around here, 6:30, planning to be done by about 9 o'clock. If anybody has any questions or comments they want to make during the presentation, please fire that into the chat section of the browser, and any questions we'll end up passing on to the people that are presenting at the time. Greetings to everyone. Everybody's starting to come in. Good to see people from across the country. Apparently we have a really big crowd tonight that registered, so we're looking for a good group. So we definitely have a good group looking at everybody coming into the room, so that's awesome. Back to maybe the schedule. So first of all, we're going to be starting off with a short presentation from one of our sponsors for the event, followed by the main presentation on VFR Phraseology, and the end of that, we'll have another short presentation from one of our sponsors, short break, and then full question and answers on the main presentation. And we're still seeing lots of people coming in, so that's good. One thing to note for everybody is that the speaking functions for the attendees aren't enabled for this particular presentation. So again, if you have any kind of questions or comments that you want to make, please put those into the chat section of the browser. And we have one question already, and that is, will the recording be available? Yes, the recording will be available afterwards. Once we get it all sorted out afterwards and get it onto the website, it will be available. Okay, it looks like things are starting to slow down for people joining in. So I think maybe we'll get started with it. First of all, we're going to start off with a presentation by one of our sponsors, Zolio. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Todd Fitzpatrick from Zolio to give a little bit of information on his product and what the offer is. So over to you.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate that. Can you see my slides okay, Jim, there?
We don't have them yet, but let's...
Okay, let me start the presentation.
There we go.
Will be helpful, right?
That is now perfect. Okay, so I'm going to hide myself.
Awesome.
If anybody has had any questions during the presentation, as I said, fire them into the chat. I'll be watching, and I can pass them on to Todd as we go.
Hey, Jim, before you leave, as well, there is a poll question. I think you were going to pop that up.
Yeah, how about we start that right off? So
sure.
Poll coming at everybody who's watching, quick one coming out.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you, everyone, for allowing Zolio to have a few minutes of your time this afternoon, this evening. And yeah, I just want to give you a quick rundown on the Zolio satellite communication device. Myself, Todd Fitzpatrick, I'm based out of British Columbia and work with Zolio and Roadpost. So what is a Zolio device? Zolio is a satellite messenger based on the Iridium satellites that works anywhere in the world. You can send messages via satellite, via cellular, or via Wi-Fi. So it allows you to communicate from pole to pole via SMS, email, or app to app through the Zolio app. In addition to that, the Zolio device has an SOS alerting button that goes to SOS Monitoring services as well for emergency situations. There's also a check-in button on the Zolio device, so you can send up to 5 preset contacts your location and just an I'm okay message as well too. Of course, your GPS location goes with that, and in addition, you can also get a weather forecast. So that is a quick snapshot of Zolio. But even more so, I think more importantly, is we're going to hear from Brad, who has recorded a video on his own. And he is a pilot, obviously, and he's going to talk about his experience using Zolio as a pilot.
Hi, it's Brad. I get questions all the time about what is this unit that is on my dashboard. So I thought that I'd make a quick video today and tell you about it. We will flip this around for you. This is the Zolio unit, and it is actually an Iridium-based satellite text messenger. And absolutely love this device, fantastic. Actually gives you a 10-digit US phone number, which you can text to and from using their app. I will pop up the app real quick here on the screen so you can see it. It literally is just a regular messenger type of app, and you ties in with your contact book. So really quick and easy to send, receive messages on here. The unit itself, basically these are about $200 on Amazon. Super inexpensive. I also bought the cradle as well because I don't like mounting things like this kind of really permanently. So have the cradle, which actually underneath here you can kind of see that there's a gap. Kinds of things on here. They have a check-in button that can send to a predefined message with lat and long type of coordinates. SOS button that will actually go to the GEOS, the search and rescue type of service on here. What I really love about this unit more than anything, compared to something like a traditional satellite phone, which full disclosure, I have an Iridium satellite phone, love it, fantastic device. Things like text messaging don't work real well on it. Having to push all the different buttons and hit keys multiple times to get a letter to put out. And quite honestly, people, when they get texts or phone calls from the normal Iridium, whatever it is, 28-digit type of phone number, think it's complete junk and spam, as opposed to this that actually has the 10-digit US type phone number. And what's really great is with something like the Iridium, the regular phone system, or texting through there, when I'm out of the plane and I'm done flying, whether I stop for a meeting or I'm done for the day and back in the hotel, my messages don't go anywhere. I get them the next day when I get into the plane, or a couple hours later when I get into the plane. With this Zolio unit, what's fantastic about it is you still get your messages. The minute this thing is back on the ground, or you're basically back in cellular range, or you turn the unit off, it'll actually use the cellular network to send stuff to your phone instead. And that's just fantastic. It just basically, if it can't get out through the cellular, then it reverts, uses the Iridium satellite network. This device is made by Beam. Beam is literally a world leader in terms of Iridium type of hardware. Really good quality, works really well. Really, data plans are incredibly inexpensive. I don't know what I spend per month. I think I'm on the $30 plan per month, but that's when you're getting into satellite stuff, that is just absolute pennies. The ability to be able to be in constant communication, to get in touch with people that I need to text on the fly and have instant replies, just absolutely invaluable, especially with my flying, where I'm flying for business types of purposes and coordinating and meeting people at different locations. So absolutely love it. Highly recommend it. I know there's a lot of different devices of this type on the market. This one I can't speak highly enough. It's truly one of my favorite airplane things that I've gotten in a long time. So feel free to check it out.
Awesome. Hopefully everybody was able to see that.
Yeah, so I think there was a few technical problems with that particular video in the way that it was displaying. So
was there? Okay.
It is available, I believe, on YouTube, correct, Todd?
Yeah, so if you Google Brad Pierce and Zolio, you will definitely bring up his video. And apologies that didn't play as smoothly as what it should have. But Brad was speaking from a pilot's perspective and how he uses satellite messaging, throughout his trips and to stay in touch with people, and the value that Zolio brings to him. So definitely check it out online. So I'm just going to continue on, and Jim, you can see my slides good now, right?
Yeah, slides are good, and
Okay.
just so people know, that's the presentation tool we're using. I don't believe it was the video that you had provided for us. So
Okay,
we're
great.
having some technical problems, obviously. So
Yeah.
hopefully we'll be able to straighten it out before the end of this everything.
Okay, good stuff. Well, continuing on, so the Zolio device itself has an SOS button that is under a covered flap. So you would have to flap that up and push and hold the SOS button. It also has a check-in button as well, so you don't necessarily have to have your phone. So the phone and the app definitely enhances everything. And then it has the 4 LED lights, so you know if you have messages waiting, if you sent a check-in, the power is on, or if you've declared an SOS. The battery life is 200 hours, and it's a micro USB recharging battery. All right, we'll continue on to the next one. So one of the really key things Zolio gives you is a dedicated Canadian phone number or a US phone number if you're from the US. That's always the number that's going to be associated with the Zolio device, as long as it's either active or in suspension as well too. So that's your phone number. We've already talked about it's a dedicated global satellite messenger, and that you can do check-ins and there's SOS. You can also get weather updates, and a new feature that pilots and a bunch of different groups find very helpful is location sharing as well too, which is breadcrumb tracking, which I'll show you in a second. This is just a screenshot of the Zolio app. So the first screen, and hopefully you can see this okay, it's very much like a WhatsApp type of experience. And the app is going to be looking for cellular, Wi-Fi, and then satellite connectivity. So if you're in those fringy areas and you can sneak a message out over cellular or Wi-Fi, it's going to do that. If it can't get out through cellular or Wi-Fi, it's going to go over the Iridium satellites. Down below, which you may not be able to see, but it will give you a little satellite icon when it goes out over the Iridium satellites, and then a check mark when it hits them and a check mark when it's been delivered as well too. So you know exactly when your satellite has been delivered. So that's great. It's available on Android and iOS, and it's a free download. Somebody text messaging or emailing you doesn't necessarily have to have the app, but if they happen to have the Zolio app, you can do longer messages up to 970 characters. It is a Bluetooth connection as well to your app. So Location Share Plus is a feature we launched about 6 months ago, and you can push and hold the check-in button for 3 seconds to start this, or do it from the app itself, which is probably the better way to do it. And it's going to start breadcrumb tracking and automatically drop tracks as you go every 6 minutes to 4 hours with variance in between that. And it's automatically going to share those tracks with up to 5 check-in contacts that you have. So they're going to know as you're going throughout your flight, for example, exactly where you are, your GPS lat and long as well too, as you're continuing throughout your flight. So very handy that way. It's an add-on feature. Not everybody wants Location Share Plus, but you can add it on to any plan as well too. SOS monitoring is obviously very important for a satellite safety device. As mentioned previously, we work with GEOS. They are really the leader in emergency response. They work with just about every different type of satellite device out there, and including ours. And what we just launched last week with their latest app update is Progressive SOS. So it's going to let you know everything that's happening as you're going through that SOS event, including that GEOS has received your emergency, that they know your lat and long, and that they're communicating back and forth with you, and that message stream as well too. In addition to that, if the emergency was no longer an emergency, you needed to cancel, you can do that very quickly on this screen as well too. Okay, so that's SOS monitoring. So the pricing on the Zolio device, it's the most cost-effective Iridium satellite messenger out there. It's $269 Canadian. And then plans start at $25 per month. So there's a 25, 45, and 70. And that really just depends how many satellite messages you think you're going to need a month. And that's 25, 250, or unlimited. So you can change those plans at any point. You can suspend in your off season. So very flexible that way. Just a couple of different testimonials for aviation companies that are using Zolio. There's many private companies as well, but the LAPD has 17 Zolio's devices deployed. They use it during their missions for when they're outside of cellular coverage, which is very frequently, for communications. Team Aeromedical, as well, based out of British Columbia, kind of Squamish area, also use Zolio for medical updates during patient transportation as well too. So just a couple examples of people that are using Zolio. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. And thank you very much. I apologize the video didn't play. Feel free to check us out at zolio.com. I would also keep an eye out in the upcoming weeks and say around May 17th, give or take, for a Zolio promotion that will be coming that could save you a few dollars on a Zolio device. In addition to that, we also do a $25 free activation COPA credit as well too. So a couple incentives for your membership. So okay. Jim, I'll kick it back to you and just open it up to any questions that might have come in.
Yeah, so we got a few questions that came in during the presentation outside of the unfortunate technical difficulties. First question, I have a spot and it works infrequently as it must be vertical. I don't know if that's something that you understand what's being asked there.
Yeah, it's a good question for sure. So Spot and Zolio work on different satellite constellations. That's typically the biggest challenge. This device should have line of sight to the sky, the Zolio device. So it has, you'd want it up on your dash, mounted on your dash, so you have clear line of sight to the sky. The Iridium satellites have 66 satellites versus Spot Globalstar is about 32. So Iridium's the better constellation.
Okay. The next one was, do contacts get an email of Googlers showing your location?
They do, actually. Yeah. So when you send a check-in location, they can click on a link and that opens up a map to show where you are with your GPS coordinates.
Okay. Next one, does it work with iPad and assume worldwide?
Yes, so you can pair it up with a tablet. So it works on all iOS and Android devices. And it does work worldwide, Iridium's pole-to-pole coverage.
We had a question of cost before you got to the cost page. So I think that was covered. Another one relating to Spot. I think you've answered this. How is the Iridium network different than a Spot network or Garmin device that has been recommended? I think it's important to cover the differences. There's several out there.
Yeah.
And what's the comparisons?
Yeah, for sure. We could go into greater detail on this. The biggest differences is the satellite constellation. Both ourselves and InReach operate on Iridium. The Zolio is really a strong messenger and is a better messaging experience. It's the feedback that we've received from our customers. Garmin does a very good job with their maps. They are, that is part of their DNA. We at Zolio think we are a better satellite messaging experience for customers. So that's the key differences.
Okay. Can you share one number with a plane co-ownership?
Yes. So that's a great question, actually. So every person has their own app. The device, the number follows the device. So if Bob has his app, he can connect to the device and that number follows him. And then if Mary connects, she connects as her on her app, and then that number belongs to her at that point. So you can hand off the Zolio device quite easily.
Okay. And then the last one I have here is, can you confirm the Zolio subscription allows for monthly payments as selected by user, not an annual subscription?
That is correct. So it's a month-to-month subscription. The only caveat to that is you need to be on a plan for the first 90 days, and then you can do suspend, cancel, or whatever you want to do after that.
Okay, that's great, Todd. I don't have any other questions. I don't know if you had any last comments that you wanted to make, or we'll move on in the presentation.
Yeah, no, I'll let everybody move on and thank everyone for their time.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the, thank you very much, Todd. We're going to move on to the main presentation. I did have a couple of comments here in the talk. One is this presentation going to be a logbook sticker for the infomercial, and other ones about presentations, just so everybody knows. COPA obviously has some costs associated with making these safety seminars available. So we're trying to present things that are relevant to the aviation community and not just various other people. So please bear with that. And with that, we now have Michael Oxner to present on VFR phraseology, and I will let Michael do his introduction, as I know is in the presentation. So over to you, Mike.
Well, I want to say first, I'm very pleased to be here. I like doing these sorts of things. I worked as an air traffic controller for a while, quite a while, and some of the things that I enjoyed the most were getting into groups, talking in front of some pilots, because there's just a lot of things that aren't out there in publications or whatever, and it's good to be able to share information back and forth. So I was always getting things from doing these sorts of presentations as well that I would bring back when I was working as a controller. But if we're ready to go for the presentation, we might as well just dive right in. And there we go. I'll catch up with myself here in a second. Apologize for that. All right, so yes, this is the VFR Phraseology seminar. I hope to present some good things that are relevant for you. As far as an agenda goes, I'll tell you a little bit about myself first, and discuss a variety of topics, including some items from NAV Canada's VFR Phraseology document, some items on Transponder Operation, and a little bit about radios and RT, radiotelephony. I'll do a brief walkthrough of classification of airspace and give you a few of my own thoughts about emergencies, and give you a little peek at what you look like on an ATC radar screen. My favorite part after that will be a Q&A period, because you just never know what sort of things will come up. So we're moving on. So I'm a retired air traffic controller. I spent 2 years in Halifax Tower, and then the next 27 years in Moncton Centre, specifically in the low-level specialty where I worked en route and terminal airspace. I was operational, meaning working traffic during that entire time, but I was also involved in a lot of side projects such as training, the introduction and adaptation of many pieces of equipment that we used, as well as writing procedures for the group. For the last 6 years of my career, I was the team lead at the local level for the national PBN operational deployment team. And those projects include reviewing and modernizing airspace and instrument procedures such as STARS, approaches, and SIDS. Beyond that, I earned my private pilot license back in 1988, continued flying through my career, not as much as I would like to have done, but either way. In 2003, I started writing from my experiences on the air traffic control side of things with my aviation topic of the week, where I would pick a topic related to aviation in Canada and delve in it, write a detailed article about it. And in 2005, I wrote a daily blog for about 6 months before being picked up as a contributing author to a website. Then later as a columnist to Canadian Aviator magazine, which I'm still contributing to this day. And I consider it a point of pride that a few of my articles were requested for the aviation safety letter. So with all this going on here in my history, I tell people I don't know everything about anything, but I do know a lot about a lot, more so toward the air traffic control side. I'm not too full of myself here. Last thing I want to point out is I am not a NAV Canada representative, and the views expressed in here are my own. I did, however, consult with NAV Canada's Chris Reekin, who was planning to join us and was pulled away at the last moment. But we just conferred a little bit to make sure we got some good topics out there covered for you. So now I invite you to take some notes during the slideshow. Any questions that you have that might pop out, any clarifications you feel are needed if I didn't explain something well enough, or if something that I didn't even cover in this presentation, we'll try to address them in the Q&A period later. My personal philosophy when it comes down to this sort of presentation is that the only stupid questions are those not asked. If you're wondering something, somebody else probably is too, and it'd be a shame for neither of you to get your answer. And nothing is too small to talk about. It may spark a discussion on another topic, and you just never know what you'll learn from any of it. So we'll just move on. Now, NAV Canada's VFR Phraseology document was used a bit of a framework for this. When I made my own list of items for this presentation, I dug back into other presentations like this that I've done for other groups and things that I've seen while working control positions over the years. Then, like I say, I talked to Chris to see what he thought should be on it, and then we ended up looking at it and saying a lot of it is really well covered in this phraseology document. This book was created with input from Transport Canada, the major and regional airlines, as well as several flight schools. And it's available for free download at NAV Canada's website at the link shown here. Alternatively, you can just search for NAV Canada Operational Guides. You'll be taken to a page with a wealth of material, a lot of videos and other similar documents to this. I have posted this link on the last slide, so you will see it again later if you didn't get a chance to see it there. Now, this guide is a good foundation for radio work. It starts with the basics, including introduction to the document and how it's formatted, give you an idea of how the flow of it is. And of course, it mentions the phonetic alphabet and the glossary of words and phrases and their meanings. It also includes call signs for various ATS units and what you and as pilots can expect from them. ATS stands for Air Traffic Services, if you don't know. That includes air traffic control and flight service specialists. Several situation-specific phraseology examples in the document can be used to guide you through radio usage in whatever aspect of flight you're doing. NAV Canada also produced other useful documents in cooperation with users, most notably their IFR phraseology document. I think both of these guides are a good read for new pilots and a pretty good refresher for seasoned pilots who deal with ATS on a regular basis. So, like I said, included in the basics of this document are items related to radiotelephony. For example, in many contexts in radiotelephony, it is considered inappropriate to group numbers and letters. Call sign example here of Golf, 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 Quebec was the pilot always called himself Triple Golf, Quebec. Of course, the controllers would respond to it. Another one that was picked out was air traffic controllers saying heading 360 if they meant north. This has been confused with do a 360 and didn't get exactly the desired results. Niner. I've told all my ATC students over the years to always use Niner with altitudes and altimeter settings and whenever communications aren't clear. Just as some examples for that last point, consider altitudes of 5,000 versus 9,000. Make a big difference if separation is being applied, especially non-radar. Or an altimeter setting of 2952, if it's just said 2952 and it was mistaken as 2992, you'd have an altimeter setting showing 400 feet higher than the aircraft actually is, and of course that could be awfully important on an approach in IMC. There are appropriate places to group numbers, giving numbers as hundreds, like 700 or 4,000. Altitudes, RVRs, weather sequences, cloud heights, and all that are given in pronounced that way, 4,700. And we can also say aircraft types such as an A320 or a 737. Decimals can often be omitted, especially with radio frequency assignments, but the word point is generally considered poor form. Moving on, aviation has a number of standardized words and phrases, and each has its own meaning. Why is it important? Using standard phraseology is good for pilots and controllers alike. Many of the phraseology standards have evolved over the years, and they're commonly driven by miscommunications and misunderstandings, and their sometimes unfortunate results. Using standard phraseology helps reduce the number of miscommunications and their likelihood, especially for those whose native language is not English. As always, situations occur where these standards simply don't cover what needs to be communicated, and in those cases, just try to be clear and concise. Just if you're wondering, for the ATS side of the radios, NAV Canada has always had a program with the intent of improving phraseology for its air traffic controllers and flight services. But in recent years, the program was revamped with huge emphasis on standard phraseology, hoping that regional deviations from standards could mostly be eliminated. The ideal world, of course, a pilot crossing the country should be able to hear the same words and phrases and expect the same meanings in any given piece of airspace in the country. Similarly, it would be good for pilots to use the same words and phrases no matter where they fly so that they can be understood too. Moving on to transponders, some of you might recognize the older model seen on the top right of this slide. There are many myths about transponders, and some come down to phraseology. I'd like to dispel some of them here, starting with some common RT and what is meant, and some notes about it for you. First up, squawk ident. Obviously, this means to press and release the button marked ident. The important parts, though, only use this function when specifically asked. Don't use it when ATC assigns a new code. And also, some pilots will just hit the ident button when they first check in with ATC, proudly announcing we're squawking ident. The trouble there is if ATC sees multiple targets on their display flashing, and none can technically be considered identified, and the process has to start all over again for each aircraft, taking time and attention for everybody. Recycle your transponder. Turn it off for a few seconds, then turn it on again. Now, personally, I'll recommend a minimum of 5 seconds. That is the update interval for en route radar displays in Canada. It does let the controller positively see the change on the screen to off and back on. So it's a good number. Squawk 4342, whatever code they give you. That obviously means to set a new code. Some people will set their transponders to standby and change the code and then turn it on again. I guess newer transponders are probably not so prone to that. But the idea was to avoid accidentally cycling through emergency codes. ATC needs to see your radar, or sorry, your target on the radar to use it, and turning the transponder off leads to a temporary loss of that target on radar. Controllers would prefer not to lose sight of you if they can. Squawk mode Charlie, or squawk mode C, turn on your mode C. Just check your transponder to ensure that the altitude reporting function is selected. If you'd previously been asked to turn it off because it was invalid, advise the controller. This brings us to the next point. Stop mode C, or stop altitude squawk, variety of phraseologies like that. Some transponders can't turn off the mode C without turning off the transponder. If this is your case, just advise the controller. They'll most likely have you keep it on, since it's better to see a target with the wrong altitude than not see a target at all. Identified. You'll hear this term when ATC knows which target on the screen is yours. And if you're IFR, you can now omit position reports. And whether you're IFR or VFR, ATC still may ask for a position report if you're identified, in which case please do so. And surveillance service terminated. This is relatively new. In the past, we said, as controllers would say, radar service terminated. But they're now recognizing that there's a lot more than just radar in the term surveillance these days. In any case, it means the controller or the flight service specialist either can no longer see you or will no longer be directly monitoring your progress any further. So now let's talk a little about the operation of the transponders. Normally, you turn it on when you're entering a runway for takeoff and turn it off when you exit the runway after landing. This does reduce ground clutter on ATC's radar screen. And that being said, there are some airports where controllers use transponder-based surveillance on the aerodrome surface. Such direction will normally be published in the procedures section of the airport's Canada Flight Supplement entry. And it's also recognized that some aircraft have a weight on wheels switch tied to the transponder, meaning they can't keep them on manually. And if an air traffic controller wants your transponder on during taxi and you can't, just let them know. Some airspace is designated as transponder airspace. This designation is separate from the classification of airspace, and it means that a transponder with the altitude encoding, mode C, is required for operation within. Such a designation will appear on charts, and if you're familiar with it, the Designated Airspace Handbook. I mentioned that a couple of times in the slide. If you really want more on it, I can let you know at the end. Just let me just ask the question. Now, a common question is, should you keep a previously assigned code in your transponder if surveillance service is terminated and you're on a VFR flight plan? Old school direction said, nope, you should squawk 1200 when you hear that phrase change to en route frequency. Keeping the code selected allows air traffic controllers or in-flight services to keep an eye on you if you're still in coverage or later visible to another ATC unit, even after termination of services. This way, if you suffer an emergency, it's a lot easier to look at the recorded track history with an identification tag on it to show us where you were last seen on radar. My recommendation is to keep the code on the transponder for the remainder of your flight plan. Moving on to radio. So radiotelephony is as much an art as it is a science. We'll just review a few basics as a reminder to some good practices. First, it's easy when using the radio to clip your transmissions. That's cutting the front and back off it, especially when you're busy or if you're a fast talker by nature. Try to avoid clipping by getting in the habit of keying the mic before you start talking. Some folks will say half a second before you're going to speak. And keep the mic button pressed until you're done. That ensures everything you're saying gets out. Another thing is to keep a listening watch so you don't miss calls directed at you. Some of those calls might be time critical, such as traffic pointouts, vectors, or other turning instructions from ATC and so on. Plus, staying tuned in can help you gather information to get the picture of what's going on and might help you anticipate conditions or traffic in the area in which you're flying. Sometimes when training a student pilot, an instructor has been known to turn down the volume of the ATC frequency for the sake of conversation with the student. The trouble there is that it's sometimes has led to missed calls from the controller. And again, sometimes those calls are time critical, especially when it comes to traffic pointouts and so forth. If you must leave an ATC frequency to make a report, update a flight plan with FSS or whatever, just let the controller know. That way, if anything urgent is coming up, it can be given to you right away, and the controller won't make repeated calls to you when you're not there. When tuning into a new frequency, listen briefly before making a transmission. Some pilots will just blurt out their transmission and sometimes stepping on others, reading back a clearance, making a request, or whatever. Sometimes a pilot just breaks into a long transmission on initial contact and giving all these details, and sometimes that will block a frequency, meaning ATC might be late with a landing clearance or a turn to a localizer or something. So just on initial contact, check in just stating who you're calling and who you are, and then wait for the reply. Sometimes it's good to rehearse your intended transmission in your mind before keying the mic. And this might help you eliminate some unnecessary words, so forth, or maybe reducing the time of your transmission. Common guidelines say to speak in a normal conversational tone and use a steady rate of speech. Speaking too loudly can overmodulate your voice, making your transmission hard to make out. And of course, speaking too softly means your transmission may not be heard in its entirety, if at all. I do have a note about tone and inflection to come later in emergencies when we come back to that topic. Now, if a transmission will be long or include a number of details, such as a routing request with a lot of waypoints, a PIREP or something, get ATC's attention first with your call sign and the purpose of the transmission to come, and then wait for the controller to reply. This allows them time to get ready to copy your transmission. When they do reply, don't speak too quickly or details might be missed. Now, when it comes to identifying yourself when you make a radio call, initial contact, give your aircraft type, and then your four-letter call sign. So example, Moncton Center, Skyhawk, Golf, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. And then in subsequent communications, just use the last three letters, so Alpha, Bravo, Charlie will do. Listen out for similar sounding call signs. ATC quite often sees similar flight numbers for airlines, but sometimes it happens with similar aircraft registrations as well. Controllers and flight service specialists have direction for advising a pilot when a similar sounding call sign is on the frequency with them. And they may actually even instruct you to identify yourself differently, such as asking you to prefix your three-letter call sign with your aircraft type. With readbacks, some pilots read back a lot of information, such as weather sequences that were issued to them or traffic issued by a controller. And a lot of these times, just an acknowledgement is all that's required. To acknowledge a transmission from a controller, You just have to use your call sign, so which by this time, of course, would be the last 3 letters. So what does require a read back? All IFR clearances must be read back, but we're VFR in this seminar, so what else needs to be done? Hold short instructions. This applies to whether you're taxiing or if you're in flight given a landing clearance and told to hold short of an intersecting runway. Now, just as an aside, the AIM tells us the phrase holding short is a position as opposed to a hold short instruction and does not require a readback. The example here would be India Delta Oscar, taxi to runway 05 via Alpha and Charlie, contact tower 1184, holding short. So that's actually not a direct hold short instruction. So if you don't read that back, you're okay. Instructions for crossing a runway are supposed to be specifically stated by a controller when issuing taxi instructions. Now, while the AIM recommends reading back runway crossing instructions, they aren't actually technically required. That said, I agree with the AIM's recommendation. I think it's a good practice since runway incursions are a serious safety concern. They're almost always among the most frequent occurrences in our system in Canada, and this sort of thing can help avoid them. Now, I also recommend reading back altimeter settings for those who fly IFR. I've heard many incorrect altimeter readbacks over the 29 years I worked as a controller, and this allowed me to catch them early. Now, another quick note for IFR pilots, when you're reading back clearances, try to read them back as they're issued. Some pilots read back items in a random order as they can think of them, and scattering elements of a clearance readback not only invites missing items, or on the part of the pilot speaking, excuse me, or the controller trying to listen to the readback, but it may even change the interpretation of the instructions if they're put out of order. So to aid a pilot in hearing elements of an IFR clearance correctly, ATC is trained to issue clearances with items being in a proper, consistent order, and hopefully your controllers are doing that sort of thing. Now, if you're not quite sure you have any information correct, ask for clarification, and the best time to do it is always now. The longer you wait for to ask for clarification, the more likely you are to put somebody, perhaps you, in a bad position. When receiving a clearance, be it takeoff, landing, IFR clearance, or whatever, be sure to listen to what's being said. We often set expectations of what should come next and mishear the transmission that actually comes through. This has led to serious occurrences, but seeing past your own expectations and listening to what is said can help avoid another one. Now, in this section, I just want to cover quickly a few items that some pilots may not be well aware of as far as required calls go. First off, we'll talk about arrival and departure messages. These are required when you're operating on a flight plan or flight itinerary because ATS personnel are responsible for alerting services, and that means services to alert officials such as search and rescue, and perhaps other local agencies if you don't take off or land in the time frame allotted. If you're on a flight plan, you are responsible for filing these messages at locations where ATC facilities such as Tower and FSS exist. These are often done automatically, but you are free to ask if any action was taken on your behalf, such as confirming that a flight plan was closed after you land. Arrival and departure messages may be filed directly with FSS if there's a transceiver within reach, or a phone call can be made to FSS once on the ground too. Now, generally speaking, alerting services for IFR flight plans are covered by ATC and the area control centers, and VFR flight plans, they're handled by flight information centers. The items to put into an arrival or departure message, just a few there at the bottom: aircraft call sign, your flight plan or itinerary type, be it IFR or VFR, your point of departure, destination aerodrome, and the date and time of arrival. Position reports is an item that comes up as well. Many VFR pilots don't make them at all, and IFR and VFR pilots, especially operating in radar environments most frequently, they're often unprepared to make position reports with the required information. For VFR position report, so just include your aircraft identification, so who you are, your position, where you are in reference to a nav aid, a distinct geographical reference, etc. The time we get you overflew the given point, the altitude, and either VFR or VFR over the top, and then your final destination, so where you're heading. Reports can be made after the fact, so if you passed a point 5, 10, even 20 minutes ago, you can still relay the position report at the time you actually passed it. Flight service specialists use position reports to update your flight plan. So in the event that something goes wrong, they'll use those positions as a starting point when they talk to search and rescue personnel, instead of searching all the way back to your point of departure. It saves time when SAR personnel don't have to look at places you've already passed. So position report example, Alpha Bravo Charlie over St. John VOR at 1204, 5,500 VFR, destination Moncton. Doesn't take much time. Now, just talk briefly about emergencies for the radio part of it. As a reminder to the radio terms and their usage, we use pan-pan to indicate urgency and mayday as emergency. Urgency means the aircraft is not in dire straits just yet, but could be if the situation deteriorates further. Emergency, this is everything on the line, priority number 1. In either case, speak the term 3 times and then add your aircraft's call sign. This will get the attention of everyone on the frequency, most notably ATC. If a controller can't hear you, perhaps getting that attention of everybody, including the pilots around, maybe one of those can hear your call and relay your situation to the controllers. Now, in my career, I've worked many emergencies one way or another, and I've observed that most pilots rarely use these terms. Usually what happens is controllers hear the information given by the pilot and determine whether a state of emergency or urgency exists and how to handle it. That said, the controllers may not always be right, and I want to circle back to emergencies a little bit later with more on that point. Either way, use of the phrases, or at least getting ATC's attention before blurting out a mouthful of information, allows the controller to get ready to write the details you're about to say. As another note here, don't be afraid to ask for information or assistance. ATC knows the cockpit has suddenly gotten very busy if you're in a state of emergency, and perhaps they can relay to others information on your behalf, or give you information that they have, such as weather, suitable nearby aerodromes, anything. Now, just a quick note about fuel issues. If you have enough fuel to press on to destination, provided you don't encounter any undue delays, this is considered having minimum fuel. Controllers will handle aircraft advising of minimum fuel as being first if all else is equal. Controllers will not treat an aircraft with minimum fuel situation as an emergency unless specifically asked. Now, if you tell a controller it's a fuel emergency and you have to land the aircraft at the nearest suitable aerodrome, I guarantee a controller will handle this as an emergency. You will get priority. So I'll come back to emergencies a little bit later, like I said, but for now, we'll talk about a couple of items related to controlled airports. First, controllers sometimes give departure instructions. These are not a takeoff clearance, but rather directions as to what to do after you receive your takeoff clearance, and which will come in a later transmission. Some examples of departure instructions would be on departure, climb runway heading to 3,000 before proceeding on course, or right turnout approved, not above 2,000 until clear of the zone. Now, while a readback is not technically necessary, pilots should at the very least acknowledge these instructions. And again, acknowledgement is just saying your aircraft call sign, so the last 3 letters. Assuming you heard the transmission right, if you don't have any questions about it, then this is good enough. If you are IFR and receiving a change to your departure instructions, of course, that's IFR, definitely you need to read those back. Now, just as an aside, ATC tries not to use the term takeoff unless actually issuing a takeoff clearance, just to help keep the ambiguity at a minimum. So if you don't hear the words takeoff in what your controller is saying, the absence is a pretty good indicator that you haven't received your takeoff clearance just yet. Now, also, if a controller asks if you are able and immediate, don't agree to it unless you can taxi out onto the runway, commence your takeoff roll immediately without stopping as soon as you receive your takeoff clearance. Use of this term by the controller means that they see a slim window of opportunity and we're offering you a chance to take off and avoid delay due to other traffic. But if you still have a checklist to complete or feel that you're just not quite prepared for it, just simply refuse it just by saying negative. Now,
Mike,
moving on. Oh,
Mike,
sorry.
I'm just going to jump in for a second. We do have a few questions that maybe just on some of the previous slides that maybe you want to get to before we go right through everything. It's up to you.
Yeah.
Go back here and get to the start. Actually, the very first one was an interesting one, which was very early in the presentation. What is the number one mistake that student pilots make when talking to air traffic control?
You might be surprised at me not having much of an opinion on that. I think a lot of whether it's students or like I'll say this: when I got my pilot's license, I was poorly prepared. I was taught that air traffic controllers were traffic cops just waiting to write you up and issue tickets as soon as you did the smallest little screw up. That's not the case. Controllers are there like anybody else to do their job. They don't like paperwork any more than anybody else. So we're actually willing to put up with an awful lot. I think if I can say there's a mistake, it might be trying to cover up a mistake you made as opposed to, well, as far as phraseology goes, maybe it's funny to hear me say this, but talking too much. Most transmissions that you can make in terms of dealing with the controllers can actually be fairly short. And one of the things that's like an air traffic controller can't do his job without being able to communicate. And if the frequency's tied up, you know, that's our bread and butter right there. Is a blocked frequency means you can't do something you need to do or take the next action, give the next instruction. So that rehearse a transmission before you actually make it, that's a good practice until you're really firmly established in the cockpit.
And you know what, that last point for me, for my days in flight service, I would say is the same thing, that people, you know, especially when you're a new pilot, think about what you're going to say before you get on the radio, that you're not stumbling then to try and make the message or give the message you're trying to do. So, okay, that was one. The next one, and it must have been in relation to a particular slide, but it's like when you ask for a position report, is ATC asking you to press ident or give a verbal position?
Oh, if you're being asked for a position report, it is a verbal position report, not squawk ident. Okay. If you don't hear the words squawk ident, don't hit the ident button.
Next one was on initial contact. So you should be avoiding the Charlie of the call sign on initial contact.
Yeah, we don't need to hear the Charlie. Basically, if you're a Canadian airplane, the Charlie's implied.
Next one, I was told if controller calls you back with 4 letters, you should then use 4 instead of 3.
Yes, I'll give it on initial contact. When you say your Foxtrot Alpha Bravo Charlie, the controller is supposed to reply to you as Foxtrot Alpha Bravo Charlie. But if the conversation continues and the controller keeps using the 4 letters, I like to think that if there's a Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie out there with you, that the controller would have said something to you to give you that heads up. That is part of their written direction. But if the controller keeps using the 4 letters, I think it's probably best that you do that as well in the reply.
And I believe you get to that about the mixed idents or similar idents later in the presentation, if I recall.
Yeah.
Next one, does ADSB out replace VFR position reports?
There's a lot in that question, believe it or not, because when I left the center, I was told, by having my hand deeply into the equipment, I was told that that ADSB was not going to be coming into the low-level airspace in the foreseeable future. Now, I already know from talking to my friends who are still in the center there that obviously has changed, because they are at the very least doing a test with it in Montreal, and it may actually have progressed elsewhere. So I know that they were planning to expand it, even though they told me not to. So given what I know about Aireon and how the data was coming in, it certainly does bring that possibility that they'll be able to track your flight quite directly right up until the electricity is turned off to your transponder, one way or another. So for the time being, I don't think we should hope that it's going to, but you might see direction saying that that kind of position report isn't necessary in the future.
Yeah, and I, from what I've been watching on ADSB out, and what's coming to us, there is possibilities for search and rescue and VFR position knowledge, let's say, if needed in a search and rescue environment. Obviously, if it's being used, ADSB as surveillance, and you're having flight following, something like that with ADSB, yes, you'd obviously be followed on it. Still a story to be told, I guess, and how it's going to be applied. So
yeah, and like I know there's talk about this the mandate that's coming. I don't really know all the ins and outs of that. My knowledge of what was going on with Aireon was strictly from the technical side of it, and I can say, like, as a controller, I was excited to see this project go, and I was excited for the possibilities of it, because there were areas that we couldn't see. We were relying, doing procedural separation, so we're relying on position reports from pilots to establish these ungodly wide separation minimums. But with radar, we can use so much less. It can be so much more expeditious. So it just said, like, we could do so much more with this. And of course, being able to see anybody in an emergency situation, having that data right down to the ground, if worst came to worst, that's just, to me, it'll save so much time on a search and rescue thing. It's ADSB out is a wonderful thing.
So we're definitely going to have to see how everything pans out with it.
Yeah,
lots of opportunities. I think there's lots of questions still there. Okay, on to the next one. Question. And reading it, I'm thinking that this is a little bit more in VFR or flying, looking to do position reports to other traffic. But is it necessary to add any conflicting please advise to a position report?
No, that's not specifically as an air traffic controller thing, because if it's uncontrolled airspace or something like that, then controllers aren't involved. I'm putting my pilot opinion out there. The reason you're making the position report is to tell everybody where you are, and if they determine that they're conflicting with you, they should respond. Whether you ask them to or not, they should. So I think it's extra words, a little extra time on a frequency that might be busy.
The next one is pan, 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 pan. That's 6 times. Is this new?
Yeah, I know. That's how it's written in the books. And I have, in the 29 years I worked as a controller, never once heard the phrase said by a pilot. So I wouldn't even know how a pilot would have used it to talk to me. Like I said, usually the controllers would hear what the pilot is saying, and they would get a sense for, like, okay, he's got it under control, we're going to keep moving. Or, everything's hitting the fan and this is bad. So yeah, I think I've only heard, for all the emergencies I work, I only heard Mayday spoken once. So
yeah,
anyway.
Yeah, definitely not one of those things that I think you hear very often is pan. So I think maybe those of us in the pilot community are often a little afraid to say that we're in trouble till we're really in trouble, which maybe we should all think about. But
I think one of the more interesting phrases I got was a Cherokee getting into some thunderstorms, and he got into what started as an updraft and then a downdraft that he couldn't outclimb. And his phraseology to indicate emergency was, "I'm getting the snot beat out of me."
Okay, where are we here? Is affirm the terminology for affirmative?
I think it was briefly. I don't even remember the note that I was told about it, but somebody in flight services told me that they got a staff memo about it. And if it ever was for air traffic control, I didn't see it, but it didn't last very long if it was.
Okay. Couple of these, I'm going to have to read them a second time before I figure out what exactly is going on here. Is a pilot to confirm the numbers assigned when given a transponder code?
It's not required unless you're not sure if you heard it quite correctly. Then certainly ask, but it's not required as a readback. No. Just set the new code, and if all goes well, I'll see the change on radar, and on we go.
A last one. There's a couple others that we'll maybe address when we get to the end here. If you are a slow ultralight call sign, Charlie India Alpha Bravo Charlie, how best to identify yourself? Preface your transmission India Alpha Bravo Charlie in slow flight, or ultralight Alpha Bravo Charlie?
I would say ultralight India Alpha Bravo Charlie.
Okay, that's what we got for now. So why don't I give it back to you to continue on with the main part of the presentation?
Sounds good. All right. So let's see, where were we? Okay, so we're talking about departure instructions. I just gave a couple of examples there. So yeah, while a readback is not technically necessary, you should acknowledge them. If there's any question about whether you got it right, reading back will let a controller give you have an opportunity to make sure it was either said correctly or corrected for you. Let's see, I think we finished that slide there, didn't we? Yeah. Okay. Moving on, the AIM calls it en route ATS surveillance, but most seem to know it as flight following. And technically, that's not quite the same thing. Either case, ATC may be able to watch over your flight, give information to you as it becomes available. That could include observed traffic, most notably, or deteriorating weather conditions ahead or at your destination, and some other items. Now, that said, there are limitations to this service. Radar systems have a limited range, and that range depends primarily on your altitude. Also, in most areas of Canada, primary radar coverage does not exist, and that's reflected radiation. The radar depends on your transponder to see you, and that means traffic without transponders will not be visible to ATC. Also, if they forgot to turn it on, it won't be visible. So you're unlikely to be informed as to whether you're in an area without primary radar coverage. So don't assume ATC will see everything that's out there. Still keep a watch out the windows for traffic. Make sure you remain in BMC. And also keep a listening watch on the frequency, advising ATC if you have to leave it. The controllers will know that you have to make a mandatory frequency call if you're flying low and pass an aerodrome, or update your flight plan with FSS or whatever. From a controller's perspective, it's awfully frustrating to call a pilot who asked for extra attention and then not be able to get a hold of the pilot when they need to. Next thing about it is controllers may not be in a position to provide the service. The extra workload may be difficult to contend with. If ATC is unable to provide the service, you won't always be told the reason. Just like in the cockpit, if a controller's radio is not being, let me try to say that again. If a pilot's radio is not busy, the controller does not assume the pilot is not busy. And the same thing goes the other way around. Controllers have a lot of things to do in the background behind the scenes. They might be coordinating aircraft movements with other controllers, or flight services, or issuing clearances by phone, and so on. In Moncton Center, we would give oceanic clearances to aircraft going into Ganders or New York's oceanic airspace, and those were painful processes. So, yeah, you may not know why you're being refused the service. When you are requesting the service, tune to the appropriate frequency, give your initial call, and that is just your aircraft type and your 4-letter call sign. This gives the controller a chance to get ready to copy the information. If a pilot just blurts it all out right off the top, you may be asked to say all of it, or at least a lot of it again. That also blocks the frequency. And like I said, the time on the radio is an important thing for the controller. When ATC responds, state your details, hopefully including items listed on the left side of this slide, and then the nature of the service you're requesting, so en route surveillance in this case. So for example, pilot would say, Moncton Center, Cessna Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie, Cessna Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie, Moncton Center, Alpha Bravo Charlie, Cessna 172, VFR from St. John to Halifax, 5,500. We'll fly up the coast to Martin Head before crossing the Bay of Fundy, request en route surveillance. Now, I gave that little example there of telling them what the route is because most, especially with everybody having GPS, people like to fly straight lines, and sometimes they have a reason not to. But if you don't tell me you're not going to go east, you're actually going to go south first, it'd be nice to know. Now, pilots receiving the service should be aware of the classification of airspace they're in. This tells what rules the pilot must follow, and also, more importantly, what authority ATC has over the flight. Depending on the airspace classification, ATC may assign headings in the form of vectors or altitudes, or place restrictions on the flight, such as not above 3,000 feet or remain west of the Sunspot River. In airspace where the controller does not have the authority to assign or restrict your operation, they may still offer suggestions as to how you can remain clear of other traffic. When controller suggests a course of action, the pilot remains responsible for deciding whether to act on the suggestion and should advise the controller of whatever action is taken, even if it's something entirely different than the suggestion. We'll talk a little more about airspace shortly. Pilots are also responsible for remaining clear of any restricted airspaces along the route of flight. Like I said, GPS is really handy in making straight lines, but controllers routinely see pilots flying into areas they shouldn't. A lot of GPS units don't show restricted airspaces, and many of those that do are not updated in real time when airspaces go hot. So to demonstrate a little bit of this, here's a snippet from the Moncton VNC. Those familiar with the area would know that Fredericton's in the top center of that, and St. John's in the bottom right. CYR 724, that big hatched area there, never appears on NOTAM summaries as active because it's charted as continuously active from the surface to flight level 250 as continuous live firing. And pilots flying directly between St. John and Fredericton would go through the middle of it if they didn't realize it was there. Now, we also have CYR 720 to the east and 721 to the west. That slide, one of those is incorrect. 721 is to the east. Anyway, they're published on the chart with vertical dimensions, but both of them are charted as occasional by NOTAM. And if you're just checking the destination and point of departure NOTAMs, you may not see areas like that go hot along your route. Pilots flying between Moncton and Bangor, both being ports of entry for customs, fly on that blue line, go right through the middle of it, and they wouldn't know they're there if they didn't check the rest of the NOTAM summaries or their charts. Airspaces of this nature and their details can be found on the charts and with more detail in the designated airspace handbook, so the DAH. That is available, by the way, for download for free at NAV Canada's website. Now, whether you're IFR or VFR, pilots receiving surveillance services, meaning they were previously told they are identified, may receive traffic information using the clock system. 12 o'clock means straight ahead, 9 o'clock means on your left, 4 o'clock means on your right and slightly behind. It's important to note a few things about this. First, remember other aircraft won't be detected by surveillance systems in most airspace in Canada if they don't have a transponder or forgot to turn it on. Second, it's based on your track over the ground, not your heading. So I'll try to demonstrate this. First, we have our airplane here. I didn't have an airplane symbol for this when I was building the slide, so we'll just say he's flying a Piper Arrow. So he's on a northbound track on our fictitious radar screen. So now we'll add another airplane here. If we try to point out the green aircraft to the white one using the clock system, you can see that the green aircraft is at the white aircraft's 2 o'clock. Let's add wind to the equation. So this wind is from the west. In order to keep the northerly track, the white aircraft needs to change to a little more westerly heading, like that. But now you can see that the green aircraft is no longer at the aircraft it's at 2 o'clock, but now it's at the 3 o'clock. Oops, I went through that a little quickly there. So you can see how this drift here, I mean, it's a little bit drastic in the example. Drift this strong would require a strong wind from the west to achieve this 30-degree difference. But the concept remains. Don't expect your traffic to be exactly where the controller is telling you to look for it. It's merely an aid to help you find the traffic. Some examples, Air Canada 123, traffic 2 o'clock, 4 miles, westbound, type and altitude unknown, slow moving. Alpha Bravo Charlie, traffic 12 o'clock, 3 miles, eastbound, Cessna 172 at 3,500. Now, as an aside, if ATC keeps pointing out traffic to you and it's at a constant bearing and a closing distance, that is, if it's always at your 2 o'clock and with every point out the distance is getting smaller, you and your traffic are on converging courses and your paths are likely to intersect. Listen carefully to the altitudes if given, keep your eyes peeled, be ready to take action. Now, when ATC issues traffic information to you, reading back the traffic information the controller gave you is not required, is not desired. Just reply with your call sign and a quick, simple phrase. If you missed something, feel free to ask about it. But the two best phrases to reply with, in addition to your ident, is traffic in sight and looking for traffic. A lot of pilots, in my experience over the years, have a tendency to say, with the traffic. But when I ask them, confirm you see the traffic or you just got my information, most of them will say, oh yeah, we have the traffic information, as opposed to the much more valuable meaning, I have the traffic in sight. When you do report the traffic in sight, the controller will expect you to maintain visual separation from that traffic, including remaining clear of wake turbulence if there's an issue to be kept in mind there. So let the controller know what action you take, if any, including if it's just that you'll continue to proceed as you were. If you lose sight of the traffic, please state that fact reasonably quickly. That way the controller can point out the traffic to you again, give alternate instructions to you or the other guy, whatever is necessary. I'll walk through a little bit of airspace classification here. You already know there's 7 classes of airspace in Canada. We letter them from A to G. A is the most controlled, G is completely uncontrolled. The services provided to pilots and the pilot's responsibilities depend on the class of airspace. And in all classes of controlled airspace, IFR are subject to ATC clearances and instructions, and separation from other IFR aircraft will be provided by ATC. That's how it is everywhere in those. Now for VFR, the weather minima for VFR flight increases in any kind of controlled airspace to help with the concept of see and be seen. To operate VFR in controlled airspace, a pilot requires a minimum visibility of 3 statute miles, and the aircraft must operate clear of cloud by 500 feet vertically or 1 mile laterally. This becomes important not only within control zones around airports, but also many areas of en route airspace as well, as I'll try to describe in a moment. So starting with Class G, completely uncontrolled. ATC has neither the authority nor the responsibility to direct any flight, whether IFR or VFR. The VFR weather minima, the weather minima for VFR flight is as lax as it can be in any classification of airspace. Transponders are not required. Airspace can receive the classification of G, whether they're high or low level airspace. And just for classification purposes in Canada, low level airspace is defined as surface to below 18,000. Meaning 18,000 is not part of low-level airspace by the definition, and high-level airspace is 18,000 and above. So VFR, well, you're not going up into the high-level stuff. Class E airspace is controlled airspace within which IFR and VFR is permitted. VFR pilots are not required to be in contact with controllers in Class E airspace, and if they are, ATC doesn't have the authority to restrict or direct a VFR flight. Controllers may offer suggestions to VFR aircraft in Class E, but that's all it is a suggestion. It's not conflict resolution. Responsibility for seeing and avoiding the other traffic remains with the VFR pilot. When in contact with the controller, it's good practice for pilots to advise the controller of actions they've taken. Like I said, whether the suggestions are followed or another course of action is chosen that's totally different, this just keeps the controller in the picture of what you're doing. provision of service to VFR by ATC in Class E depends on ATC equipment and workload. Now, airways extend Class E airspace down to 2,200 AGL. So where deemed necessary by Transport Canada, control area extensions, normally also based at 2,200, are defined to facilitate control of IFR traffic outside of airport terminal areas. Also, at many airports with instrument approach procedures, transition areas are established to contain those procedures and raise weather minima for VFR flight near the paths associated with them. All of these areas are charted on VNCs. It's a little hard to see it. When you take time and study it and see what the hash marks mean, you can pick it out. They're also described in the Designated Airspace Handbook. Yet another reference to that one. Class E control zones that extend controlled airspace down to the ground. They're established around some aerodromes in Canada, raising VFR weather minima in the vicinity of that aerodrome and authorizing ATC to control the movement of IFR aircraft from the ground up. Normally, those kinds of control zones are designated as mandatory frequency areas, so you have to have a radio to be in there. Class E airspace may also be designated as transponder airspace, meaning you need a functioning transponder with altitude encoding, or Mode C. For example, Class E airspace between 10,000 and 12,500 inclusive is transponder airspace, as are some terminal areas around some busier airports. Class D is where it starts to get a little more interesting for the VFR pilot. It's controlled airspace, most often associated with controlled airports and their control zones. Remember that airport is controlled if there's a tower in operation. Some of the busier terminal areas are also designated Class D airspace. So VFR flight is permitted in Class D, but a pilot must establish two-way communication with the appropriate ATC unit, whether that's a tower or a terminal control unit or the area control center. Notably, if you want to enter Class D airspace and you call ATC and receive standby as an answer, it actually qualifies as having established two-way communication. You're permitted to enter. Aircraft without a working radio or transponder may be permitted to enter as well with prior approval from the appropriate ATC unit, but in daylight hours and VMC only. In Class D airspace, IFR aircraft are provided separation from other IFR aircraft. ATC will provide traffic information to VFR aircraft. If ATC workload and equipment permits, conflict resolution will be provided between IFR and VFR and between VFR aircraft who request it. This may be done by issuing restrictions to the VFR aircraft, and this is where we have to be a little careful about it. If a restriction would make VFR flight difficult or impossible, such as if the restriction would have the VFR aircraft enter cloud, the pilot should refuse the restriction outright and advise ATC of the reason as soon as possible. Controllers are not always, or actually very unlikely to know of the existence of cloud or especially the exact position of it. So we would need that from you. If you can't take a restriction because of cloud or something like that, let the controller know. Now, Class D airspace reverts to Class E when the appropriate ATC unit is not in operation. So, for example, if a tower doesn't run a 24/7 operation, their control zone reverts to a Class E control zone when they close. Class C airspace becomes a little more controlled than preceding classes. VFR require a clearance from ATC to enter, so hearing standby no longer constitutes permission as it does for Class D. You need to actually talk to the controller and get a clearance in. Separation is applied by ATC between IFR aircraft. Conflict resolution will be provided between IFR and VFR, so that's that next step up. VFR aircraft will be provided with traffic information on other VFR aircraft, and they'll get conflict resolution if they request it. So in Class C, all aircraft are required to have two-way communication with ATC and a Mode C transponder. However, there is the possibility aircraft without a working radio or transponder may be permitted entry with prior approval from the appropriate ATC unit, again, only in daylight hours and VMC. Class B airspace, this is the high end of what most of pilots with like a license like mine would be able to do. It's airspace within which all aircraft are subject to ATC clearances and instructions, and that's the big jump there. Separation between IFR aircraft, between IFR and VFR aircraft, and between VFR aircraft will be provided by ATC. Communications and transponders are required, although operation within Class B might again be permitted with prior approval. While it may be established elsewhere, such as control zones or terminal areas, Class B is generally defined as all low-level controlled airspace above 12,500 up to below 18,000. So what all this means is that VFR aircraft must follow assigned routings. They must have the navigation gear on board to follow those routings, not just meander as they see fit. Essentially, it's treated exactly like an IFR clearance. You're given a routing and an altitude, so don't turn, climb, or descend without a clearance from ATC. VFR aircraft in Class B can expect altitude assignments like those of IFR aircraft. Properly applied, an eastbound aircraft would get 15,000 instead of 15,500. Westbound will be 14,000. That said, I do know of some controllers who were a little iffy on the procedures themselves, and they would allow a VFR aircraft westbound at 14,500. The difficulty there, if you're wondering, is a controller in this airspace has to keep 1,000 feet between you and your traffic. If you're at 14,500, the next IFR altitude that's valid for them really is 16,000. And underneath, it's like 13,000. So instead of being able to run 1,000 feet apart, we're now looking at blocking 3,000 feet for you. So that's how it's supposed to be, is even altitudes, just like IFR. So again, the same caveats. Pilot must remain in VMC. If a routing or altitude assignment would take the aircraft into cloud, the pilot must either request a new clearance, hopefully tell the controller why the clearance was refused, so they're in the picture of it, or depart Class B airspace, says the AIM, via the most expeditious means, including descending out of it or exiting laterally if such an option exists. In any case, the controller should be advised as soon as possible of the actions being taken so they can react to it. And we'll just gloss over Class A because most of us won't get above Class A unless we're in an above 18,000 unless we're in an airliner. It is all operations are conducted under IFR. Everybody's subject to ATC clearance. Separation is provided to all aircraft by controllers, and everyone needs a radio and transponders. So all high-level controlled airspace in Canada is Class A. Technically, Class A could be designated elsewhere. Notable differences would be oceanic airspace, which is Class A from flight level 055 up, and there are some areas of high-level airspace up north that are not controlled and therefore not Class A. Now, you probably noticed I skipped Class F. The airspace is special use airspace, often for military operation or high-volume training areas. As mentioned in the en route surveillance slides, they may be published as continuously active on charts and in the DAH, in which case they won't be in the NOTAM summaries. They may also be published on charts and noted as occasional by NOTAM. For these, the pilot has to check the NOTAM summaries to find their status. Hopefully you do. Additionally, temporary restricted areas may be published by NOTAMs. Some of those NOTAMs will contain a geographic description, such as a radius around a town or other specific location. Usually it's geographic coordinates and a radius around it, an altitude ceiling and a floor if applicable, so you might be able to fly under it, and a time frame of activity. These are often outdoor public events like concerts or forest fires is another one that comes up fairly commonly. So Class F airspaces can be classified as advisory, and that means pilots may actually penetrate the areas legally, if not safely, or they might be restricted, meaning pilots are just not allowed inside without permission of the controlling agency. And the term controlling agency is a detail that will be listed in the DAH, the Designated Airspace Handbook for charted areas, or in the NOTAM summary for an ad hoc area. So when Class F airspace is not active, it reverts to the classification of airspace around it. My favorite topic, emergency assistance. We'll come back here and just talk a little bit what you can get from controllers when things don't quite go as planned. Controllers have an access to a wealth of information ranging from weather data like current observations, forecasts, SIGNETs, and all that, to weather data, radar data from Environment Canada. and they can even see up to the minute data on lightning strikes to track storm movements right on their screens. So sometimes the weather radar doesn't really show the buildups very well, but if there's a lot of lightning activity in it, the controllers will be able to see that. So navigational assistance is something that can be provided in the form of radar vectors if you're in surveillance coverage. GPS being so prevalent, that sort of thing is very rarely taken advantage of. But it's actually not a bad idea, because having somebody else look over your flight is not a bad thing, just to make sure you're going in the right direction. It's kind of like a little confirmation. But anyway, if you are being given vectors or headings to help you navigate, if controllers won't be able to see the exact positions of clouds or even the presence of them, so just remember to keep a look out the window and make sure to stay out of clouds or anything that would preclude VFR flight. Just advise the controller if the heading will take you into clouds, so something else can be determined. It's also possible that ATC can relay data on your behalf if things start going awry. Perhaps phone calls can be made for you. And of course, your position can also be relayed to the Rescue Coordination Center in case SAR is required if things really do go wrong. Some tips that I've offered in the past include reviewing of charts during flight planning to find potentially useful information, such as where ATC has peripheral frequencies, also known as PAL, P-A-L on the charts, and where FSS have remote communication outlets and dial-up remote communication outlets, also known as RCOs and DRCOs, respectively. I suggest noting these frequencies along your route of flight and also adjacent to it within a reasonable distance, considering the altitude you're planning. Assuming you're carrying a cell phone, making note of the phone numbers of facilities in whose areas you'll be flying could also be helpful. If you keep this list handy in flight, it could save you from trying to look it all up in the individual publications while in flight and probably quite busy. I'm interested to see what the ForeFlight guys have to say about this, because I haven't used the app myself, but more on that to come. Just to show you where this information is presented if you're not really familiar, on the left is a snippet of a low chart or low en route IFR chart, and on the right is the Area Control Center's entry in the Canada Flight Supplement. So on the low chart, the ACC radio locations will have a little box with the title PAL, the geographic location, and the frequency or frequencies for the location. And in the CFS, the PALs will show the place locations by place name. For this case, note that the boldface type is meant for high-level airspace usage, and those in normal typeface are for low-level. But if all you can get a hold of is a high-level controller, they'll be able to talk to you about whatever they can do for you. The entry in the CFS will also have the emergency phone number, and that'll usually put you in touch with a manager, but they'll either forward your call or at least know how to reach the right person. Now for FSS, you'll see their RCOs and DRCOs listed on the IFR charts as well, showing frequency where they may be reached. And in the back of the CFS, each Flight Information Center has a map showing all the RCO and DRCO locations. And VNCs also carry a note on RCO and DRCO locations presented in a similar way as the low charts. So if you do find yourself in an emergency and need some help, some suggestions that I have for you: if weather and circumstances permit, climb. This will give you more options for radio contact with the controller and perhaps more options for an unscheduled landing. Since VFR communications like radar are line of sight, climbing not only gives you more options for radio contact with ATS, but it also gives you better chances of being visible to ATC on radar. And this is one of those cases where ADSB, when that all comes in, the radar limitation won't be so critical there. But if you can't reach ATC directly, FSS might be able to relay for you. I can think of several instances where a pilot didn't know the ATC frequency nearby, or was unable to reach somebody, but FSS had an RCO that they could relay through. So it was good to know it. They could talk to somebody. Now, it's a fun joke. The controllers can't help you fix or fly your airplane, but having a second set of eyes looking out for you can help you confirm that you're going in the right direction. And with all the information controllers have access to, they can help you make better decisions also reduce the amount of heads down time for you, leaving you more time to focus on flying the airplane. And of course, if worst comes to worst, your last known position on radar can be relayed. We all make mistakes. We all need help sometimes. Too many pilots have attempted to conceal their mistakes to avoid embarrassment, maybe amongst their peers or to the controllers. But sometimes that means hiding details that might actually be salient to the situation. Be sure to state your needs clearly. Few controllers have pilot licenses and may not understand your situation quite the way you do. If you have limitations on your ability to fly, let the controller know, because they may not know. Now, I mentioned earlier the tone of voice in communications, that we're taught to maintain that even tone and rate of speech. I'm a fan of language usage and studying it sometime, and studies suggest that words alone only make up for 7% of communication, and tone of voice actually accounts for 38% of communication. And both of those together still mean less than half of it is being communicated. So that can change the way a message is understood. While not going overboard, using tone to emphasize your situation might actually help. I got a couple of stories I want to relay just before I go to the radar presentation, just to talk about those two points that I just made. I had one night a student pilot on a cross-country solo flight. He reported returning to Moncton with a problem with the airplane. Honestly, some controllers would have just left it at that, expecting it if it was serious, the pilot would have said so. Me being a little curious, I asked what the problem was, and the pilot reported low oil pressure, high oil temperature. Now, I'm suspecting that you guys all know that this is like an engine failure in progress. 2 minutes, 20 minutes, who knows? So the alarm bells are ringing in my head. A few minutes later, the pilot said, I'm going to just change to en route frequencies here and work locally in the training areas for half an hour. Now, my guess was that he was concerned enough with the gauge indications to turn around, but was also concerned about how much time he was losing for his logbook. I didn't like the sound of that. I suggested that he continue to the airport for landing, which he did. Working with the tower, we handled this flight as an emergency, even though no emergency was declared and the pilot never said it. Anyway, when I brought this up on our annual recurrent training the following year, this is what we do for, it's same sort of thing for pilots, but I was teaching it this year. I brought this situation up. And there were only a handful of my peers actually understood the potential severity of that. And they might have let the pilot leave the frequency, work in the training areas, and who knows what would have happened then. Now, the other one regarding tone of voice, there's a story I witnessed. I was leaving at the end of the shift. One of my peers turned around, shouted to the supervisor that he had a pilot with an engine failure. Well, me being curious, I asked him who had the engine failure. He calmly pointed to the one particular aircraft's data. I said to him, that aircraft only has one engine. Shocked, he immediately sat up and started combing the weather reports to find a suitable aerodrome for a dead stick landing, which thankfully the pilot was successful at. This guy, he wasn't familiar with the type of aircraft. And I mean, there are a lot of aircraft types out there, new ones coming online, and he just wasn't familiar with it, and he didn't know that. And listening to the tape afterwards, the pilot came over in the very stoic British accent. Moncton, I've had an engine failure and need to descend. So the tone of voice and the choice of words expressed a calm demeanor, suggesting it was no big deal, which kind of led the controller to believe that if the pilot was serious, the pilot would tell me, wouldn't he? So the elevated tone of voice might convey that urgency a little bit more clearly, maybe some different words. My engine has failed. I am descending. Might have said it a little differently. All right. So the last thing that I had prepared was a little presentation to give you a brief look at what you look like on an air traffic controller's radar screen. And I really hope the colors are clear enough on this and that you can read it here. This is a small piece of the airspace around Moncton. So first off, your aircraft symbol, your targets are plotted with varying symbols depending on the nature of how the target was derived. We have input from radar, MLAT, ADSB, which I never got to see. It was only in our high-level airspace in Moncton by the time I left, but presumably it'll be going elsewhere faster than I thought. Now, each target has a controller jurisdiction symbol on it, or CJS, at 2 characters, indicating which controller, if any, is currently responsible for that aircraft. This one, the QM, is the Moncton sector. Now on, there's also the data tag that we call, as we call it in this example, displays the aircraft identification, or ACID, ACID, and the wake turbulence category on line 1. So this is cargo jet, CJT 618, and the plus means he's a heavy. And then on line 2, the mode C altitude in hundreds of feet. The VMI, or vertical movement indicator, shows climbing or descending. Then there's VMR, which is vertical movement rate in hundreds of feet per minute. And then the ground speed in multiples of 10 knots. So this is 5,400 feet, descending at 900 feet per minute, grounding 280 knots, not indicating grounding. So the ground speed there. Still more information can be put on that data tag if you want to see it. It can actually start to get quite cluttered. But a history trail is also plotted, since seeing where the aircraft has been is a good indicator of where it's going. A faster aircraft will have larger spaces between the dots, and amazingly, this really does play to a controller's perception of what's going on. You see the distance between the dots, it really starts to mean something with practice. And also a turning aircraft, as they progress through their turn, it'll give a real good indication of how sharply the pilot is turning when you're vectoring them to final. So the display, as a background, it shows a map, and this is customized as for the needs. It includes lines indicating runways, airways, airspace boundaries, whatever symbols are required, like airports and navigational fixes and that sort of thing, whatever references they need to do their job day to day. And now controllers also have a variety of display tools, and some of which are shown here. Each aircraft is showing a predicted track line, or PTL, in green, indicating the path of the aircraft and where it'll be at the end of that line on its current ground speed, on its current track at its current ground speed. And in this case, the interval was just shown as 1 minute. Drawn between these 2 aircraft is a blue line. It really doesn't look very blue on my second monitor here. I'm not sure how it's showing for you, but this is called a range bearing line, or RIBL, RBL. It shows the bearing of cargo jet, from cargo jet to Golf Alpha Hotel Quebec, but more importantly, along with the distance between the nautical miles. Other display tools they have include halos, altitude filters, selectively filtering aircraft by CJS, who's working them, and there's a lot of other things, but those are probably the 2 most commonly used terms, at least they were for me. So, if you're still awake, you made it to the end. Any questions that we haven't already answered? I could be here all night. I could talk about this stuff forever. The links that I talked about earlier are on this slide. There's the VFR Phraseology document, which made a good framework for this presentation. And then the second link is the one that holds operational guides, including the designated airspace handbook, by the way, and other links. And last is my email address. I'm quite happy to take correspondence through email. I've been doing it for 20 years, and I find it a good way to get stuff out there.
Okay, thank you, Mike. We're going to do a short presentation from Adrian at ForeFlight, some relevance to the VFR phraseology in this one. Then we're going to do a short break and finally come back. I got a bunch of questions in the bank for you, Mike. So we'll hand it over to Adrian first, and then we'll figure out the break as soon as he's done. And we're not hearing you there, Adrian. Try refreshing your browser. Oh, and we've lost Adrian. There he is. Okay. Webinar Jam is giving us trouble tonight. I guess it's looking for the long weekend early. Okay.
It's already on the long weekend, I think. You can hear me now there, Jim?
Yeah, it's all good.
All right. And Mike, thank you. That was a fantastic presentation following along there. Let's see here. I'm just going to present present my screen and we'll start it up. Just a minute. All right. Is my slide showing there, Jim?
Yes, to me it is.
Okay, perfect. All right. So thanks, everyone, and thanks to Kobo for having ForeFlight here. It's it's a pleasure to be here. So we're going to talk a little bit about ForeFlight and how it can be a great tool to use along with some of the things that we learned with VFR Phraseology. My name is Adrian Tegler, and I'm part of the ForeFlight pilot support team. I've been with ForeFlight now since pretty close to the beginning. It's almost coming up on 10 years that I've been part of ForeFlight. I'm also a Canadian pilot. I did all my training in Ontario and went on. I did some instructing and then went overseas for some adventures, flying a caravan overseas for a couple of years commercially, and then back to Canada to fly for a regional airline. And so it's a little bit about my flying history. The whole time I've been with ForeFlight, so it's been cool to see how it's changed over the years, and used it right from the start of my commercial training right through to the commercial flying. So lots of different experiences using it. All right, so today's topics. We are going to go over a quick new feature highlight in ForeFlight, and then we're going to jump into some parts of ForeFlight that can really help you with the VFR phraseology topics that Mike's been talking about today. And so we'll look at documents in ForeFlight, talk about airspace, frequencies, look at the scratch pad, and then we'll end with some Q&A. All right, so new feature highlight in ForeFlight is the Hazard Advisor Altitude Preview. So you can now manually control Hazard Advisor's altitude before and during a flight to evaluate routes through hazardous terrain, visualize your options at different altitudes. So as long as you've updated to the latest version of ForeFlight, which is available through the App Store, you should have this feature. It is available with Pro Plus subscriptions and higher. So if you have Pro Plus or Performance Plus, you'll have this. When you select the Hazard Advisor on the map, you now have this altitude slider that you can see on the right side. And here's
Adrian, I'm going to jump in because I'm not seeing slides changing here.
Okay.
So
let's see.
Let's see what we can do here.
Okay, let me see if I can advance.
There we go. That's going. Yep, that's going now.
Okay, good. Thanks for jumping in, Jim. Yeah, I was changing on my end, but I went to a different page and now I'm changing it and I can see it. Perfect. Okay, so let's just catch up with my slide. There we go. All right. So this is a screenshot showing the Hazard Advisor altitude. And I think with this tool, it's not actually showing this slide should play kind of an active screen recording of what's going on, but it doesn't look like it's able to play that. So I'll just kind of explain what's happening. So if you select the Hazard Advisor, you now have this altitude slider on the right-hand side. And what that allows you to do is you can slide it up and down to select different altitudes, and that's going to actually show the terrain at that altitude in relation to your route. So this is a route through the mountains in BC, and it's amazing because you can really just pull that slider down and you can start to see where the terrain starts to interact with your route. So it's great if you're planning a route like this one, which goes through a valley to avoid terrain. You can see what altitudes are going to work. If you're planning another route that might be want to go over the terrain, you can use that on the ground, or you can even use it in flight to kind of see what altitudes will impact the terrain on your route. So if you have Pro Plus or if you have Performance Plus, select the Hazard Advisor, play with this, and it's a really powerful tool for visualizing terrain along your route. All right. All right, so let's get into Nav Canada documents and how they relate here to VFR phraseology. Well, first of all, you can import the VFR phraseology manual and handbook right into ForeFlight. So you can import via email, AirDrop, Dropbox, whatever you prefer. You can import that right into ForeFlight. I also put a request that we include this with our Nav Canada documents that are part of all the Canadian subscriptions. So if you've used ForeFlight, and have a Canadian subscription, there's a Nav Canada drive in the documents page, and that includes a lot of Nav Canada documents already. And I put in a request for this one, so we'll request that we can distribute that from Nav Canada. Until then, you can just import the document. You can get it online and import it into ForeFlight, along with any other documents that may not already be included. You can import. So a couple of key tools when you're using documents in ForeFlight. One that I like to use, or just use a lot, is this magnifying glass button at the top there. So once you have a document open, you can tap that and you get 3 key features. The first one is the search. So self-explanatory keyword search, and it's going to look through the whole document, and you can tap any of those items and quickly jump to that page. The next one is the table of contents. So you can see that even though this is just a regular PDF that I imported to ForeFlight, it already knows that there's a full table of contents there. So you can quickly, tap on one of those options and jump to that page for transponder phraseology. And it's a quick and easy way to get around the document. Finally, bookmarks. So you can bookmark pages that you want to come back to, and there's a bookmark section that you can tap there and jump to that page that you've saved. All right, another nice document tool is annotations. So you can go ahead and highlight sections. So if you're looking through this VFR phraseology and you want to highlight this section, you can go ahead and use different tools to highlight there at the top once you click on tap on the annotation button to do that. So you can highlight, you can just write notes if you want to, just like this for position report, make your notes. And then, as I was just talking about, you can bookmark and save that page so it's you can reference it again quickly. All right, so continuing with documents, another one that I think we probably all use quite a bit is the Canada Flight Supplement. That's available in its full form on the documents page in ForeFlight, and there's lots of good information in there. One that's nice to reference in terms of phraseology is the VFR position reports and the IFR position reports information that's in there. And you can even bookmark that if you want to reference it back again. All right, let's take a look at Airspace in ForeFlight and how that can be a great tool for that. So first of all, again, just continue with documents, but now talking about Airspace. The AIM, the Aeronautical Information Manual, is available on the documents page in ForeFlight as well. That's in the Nav Canada drive. And Mike was talking about Airspace Classification. Great way to reference it back here in the AIM. You can find that in ForeFlight. And as we know, we want to be aware of the classification of airspace that we're operating in as pilots. Of course, the rules that apply and what authority ATC has over your flight. So that's can be referenced in the AIM. And that's a nice graphic there. So I think it jumped 2 slides. Oh, okay. And yeah, so continuing with airspace, the next thing that I find very powerful tool in terms of airspace is using both the aeronautical map, which just has an airspace overlay, and then you can combine that with the airspace that is in the profile view. And this is a great way to familiarize yourself with airspace along your route. So you can see in this screenshot here, flying up to, looks like from Ottawa up to North Bay, and then continues on to Timmins in this flight. You've got 2 views. So the profile view at the top is showing you that the side profile of your route. And in this case, we're climbing up to 4,500 feet, and you can see what airspace you're going to be interacting with and going through along your flight. You're also going to see from a top-down view on the bottom part of the map any highlighted airspace that you're going to be passing through. And on top of this, you can actually tap in on the airspace in the profile view, like I've done there. It's showing that low-level Class C airspace from 2,501 up to 6,500 Class E, that one was, yeah. So you can tap through that airspace and really kind of familiarize yourself with what you're going to be going through on the flight. So here's just continuing on. So tapping another one here, this R540, 3,000 up to 18,000, and it highlights it on the map below. So you're seeing it in profile and highlighted on the map lower down. Again, there's tapping on the North Bay at Class E to 5,000 feet. All right, so other airspace here. Mike was talking about the CYRs. So of course we want to be aware of any restricted airspace that is along the route. And ForeFlight is a great tool for highlighting that. If you use the aeronautical map overlay, so that's ForeFlight's data-focused or data-driven map, and that can be overlaid on top of any of the other charts that you're using. So in this case, we've got the IFR, the Canada IFR low chart on, and you can see that ForeFlight's aeronautical layer is highlighting that CYR restricted airspace in orange. It doesn't matter what other charts, you could even use the VNC, and it would highlight this airspace as well. So I recommend using the aeronautical map together with other maps or charts that you're using. So here, if you want to find out more information, you can tap and hold within the airspace right on the map, and it's going to bring up the map sidebar. Here we go, and you can see the different airspace that's in that area. Tap on the one that you want to find out more about. So R724 here, tap on that, and it's going to bring up the information restricted, of course, the upper limit and lower limit, and then importantly, the activation. So here we can see activation continuously, including holidays. And Mike was pointing out that's important to know. To note the activation. Is it by NOTAM? Is it occasional? This one is continuous. And again, if we shift over to this one here, 721, slightly different. Activation is by NOTAM in this case. So good way to kind of dig into the airspace a little bit more here and interactively. All right, frequencies. So lots of frequencies, and it's important to note the frequencies along the route. So Mike was talking about the PAL, RCO, DRCO, FSS, FIC, all these different frequencies. And I just want to make a note. I've been showing some of the IFR low chart here, and I don't know. There's a lot of VFR only pilots out there, and if you might see this chart and kind of say, whoa, like what's this IFR chart showing here? And I'd like to encourage pilots to flip over to the IFR low in ForeFlight. Sometimes even if you're on a VFR flight, it can be a great resource of information. And the beauty of it being in a form of in ForeFlight on an iPad is you can flip between IFR low and your VNC, in a split second. There's none of this unfolding a giant chart in another chart inside the cockpit and trying to read it. You can switch between these two so quickly and easily that it's worthwhile to do so. Especially if you're looking for something like PAL frequencies or RCO on the IFR chart, can be easy and quick to find them. It can be less cluttered on the IFR chart. So even for VFR charts or VFR flights, switching over to the IFR low chart can be worthwhile to find frequencies. There's the VNC. We got FSS frequency there. So just another way to reference those. And of course, the CFS, which we talked about through the documents page and the Nav Canada Drive, which is available in ForeFlight, has additional frequency information. So here you can see the London FIC and by area there for Ontario, of course for other provinces as well and other areas, depending on where you're flying. There's more for Ontario via map view, which is kind of nice. And again, bookmark this information, save it so you can quickly recall it in flight. All right, and if you need a refresher, which is always helpful, it's good to look at the legends, and you can find legends again on the documents page in the Nav Canada drive under the legends in the legends folder, and these legends are from the VNC chart or the VTA or the IFR load chart, and they provide lots of good information on the symbols for the frequencies, the different types. They'll tell you again what the RCO is or the DRCO and what that what it looks like, the depiction on the map. So you can find all that information in the legends. All right, and Scratchpad can be a great, helpful tool as you're flying along. And so whether you're taking VFR notes on a city tour around Toronto, and it can help you with your communication with ATC, whether that's quickly writing down a heading that they're giving you, or the one that when I was doing my city tours around Toronto, you're always hoping that they don't say stay north of the CN Tower. You're hoping that they clear you for orbits of the CN Tower, but it's good to write down obviously the notes that they give you and maintain 2,000 feet or whatever it is. Scratchpad can be handy to just take notes as you fly. And of course, for IFR clearances, you can use the craft outline of the Scratchpad if you like, and take that information, or just write it on a blank page. All right, so that wraps things up. Of course, ForeFlight is we're always here on frequency 7 days a week. So if you've got any questions, well, of course, we'll go into some Q&A here in just a minute, and I'd love to answer some questions. If you have any questions that don't get answered, or any other questions kind of going forward, please email team@foreflight.com, and you're going to get a pilot replying back to you, and usually very quickly. So go ahead and do that. Other resources, we've got the ForeFlight's pilot guide, so that's online, or you can get it right in ForeFlight on the documents page. We've got videos, foreflight.com/videos, and the blog.foreflight.com has lots of the latest information. And yeah, thanks again for having me. This is a picture I took in Newark, departing Newark, and with their two parallel runways there, where they have aircraft that depart and land each on a separate runway. Kind of a nice shot there. But yeah, thanks again for having me. I appreciate it. And Jim, yeah, we'll hop into some Q&A.
Yeah, so actually some good feedback from ForeFlight users on the chat saying they love it. We do have a couple of questions. One was obviously lots of information there that, coming at people fast, and ability to, if you could work through some of that stuff, one issue at a time, which I believe I've attended ForeFlight presentations. ForeFlight does make those opportunities available on a regular basis. So maybe you just want to make a quick presentation or a quick statement on how ForeFlight does do these kind of seminars as well, right?
Yeah. So okay, yeah, it's I hear you, and there's so much these days in ForeFlight, and these things are time slots for kind of these are just short, and so we try to make them short and sweet. But yes, I hear you. Things kind of it's just like a fire hose of information so quick. So one recommendation I have is ForeFlight provides a webinars that are more in depth. So this is just a quick little look at some items in ForeFlight that relate to VFR phraseology. But if you want to dig into some more topics, for example, I've done 2 webinars on IFR flying in Canada, and my colleague and my friend who's a Canadian pilot, Dominic, he's done 2 on VFR flying in Canada and flight plan filing. You can just look up ForeFlight webinars, and if you Google that, you're going to find that, and they're there free to view, and they have great information. You can stop and pause and look at things, and it's it's a lot more in depth, and you can slow things down and really look at it that way is a good start.
Okay, great. We got a comment on your scratch pad. Love those CN tower orbits. Hate to stay north of tower instructions. So there we go.
Good. I'm glad it's not just me.
Also a comment that ForeFlight has a great website with videos as well, and YouTube channel that will answer a lot of questions as well.
Yes.
What have we got here? A question: why do some fully equipped aircraft not show up at all? I'm not sure exactly that reference, but
I wonder if that would be. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's a traffic question, or I'm not sure. Some fully equipped aircraft.
so
why
that was
they don't
Sue.
show up
Maybe
at all.
she'd like to elaborate in the chat, and we would be able to answer that for her. I think that's all. In traffic, it says. So in traffic in ForeFlight.
Yeah, okay. We can do a quick, or I can do a quick kind of touch on traffic in ForeFlight. So this would be referring to ADSB traffic. There's two, I guess there's two types of traffic in ForeFlight. So when you're on the ground and you're connected to the internet or cellular or Wi-Fi, you can get internet traffic. So that's where ForeFlight is displaying traffic data that comes through from FlightAware. So we get FlightAware's data feed of traffic and pipe that into ForeFlight, display it on the map. So you can see, we call that internet traffic. But what I think this question is referring to is in flight, internet traffic is actually disabled, and you can view ADSB traffic if ForeFlight is receiving traffic data from an ADSB receiver. So if you're using a Sentry or a Stratus, or you're using a Garmin device like a GDL 52 or that can receive traffic data, it will display it in ForeFlight. Why fully equipped aircraft may not display in ForeFlight is kind of a technical and in-depth question. First of all, in Canada, ADSB works differently than in the US, where in the US, they rebroadcast traffic data so that if you have ADSB out set up in your aircraft and you've got an ADSB in receiver, you're going to receive all the traffic information that's around you. Whereas when you're in Canada, you're only really receiving direct broadcast ADSB traffic. So that's aircraft that have the ability to broadcast their traffic information directly and it's on 1090 megahertz frequency. You'll only pick that up. So you might have a fully equipped aircraft that is mode C, but they might not be broadcasting their traffic information via ADSB on that direct frequency. So you don't have any way of receiving that. ForeFlight's not getting that information. ADSB traffic, that's a good one to write us a question at if you want to kind of dive into that more. There's some great articles that have been written through Sporties and ForeFlight on ADSB traffic, but it's a good question.
It does sound like it might be more related to internet traffic, but I think I'll put it out that maybe Sue reaches out to you and directly and has an opportunity, and we can share. I'm sure your coordinates with people with the chat. So.
Yeah. Just again, team@foreflight.com, and you can. I'm the only Adrian at ForeFlight, so if you can reference me, and it'll come to me, or someone very capable will reply as well. But if you want to speak to me directly, you can mention my name, and be happy to reply.
Okay, well, we're running a little bit behind, a few minutes. We're at 8:35. We had planned a very short break, so why don't we say 5 minutes, and we'll be back with Mike. We have quite a few questions in the Q&A section of the chat, so we will take a look at those in, let's say, 8:40.
All right.
Thanks, everyone. We'll be back in 5.
You're on mute. Oh, still can't hear you, Jim. Nope. If you want, I can start reading through some of the questions that I saw there and throw some answers out. Does that work? All right. Well, I'll read through a few and see if I can answer some of the questions while we get your side of it straightened out. Somebody asked what squawking 7700 would look like to a controller. For any of the emergency codes, the target will show up red and the tag will be red, and there will be an unmistakable sound within a woman softly speaking to you saying emergency or radio failure. It will definitely show up on everybody's display and it will get people's attention. Somebody else I saw earlier asked about what it looks like when an aircraft squawks ident, and the target will turn white, the tag will turn white, and the target will flash to give us an indication of who just pressed the ident button. And of course, once we have that, we can start providing you with any radar services. Try now, Jim. You sound awfully quiet. Still silent. Okay, let's see. I see another one here. If outside the ATC zone, but in communication with ATC, do you have to notify the controller when going off frequency? If you're just monitoring outside the zone, you don't have to say anything, of course. If you have been making contact with them, it would be good to let them know that you're leaving the frequency just so they know you're gone, rather than if something comes up, they might say if they have some traffic heading your direction, they don't bother calling you in vain. I think
I'm going to try it again here.
Yep, there it is.
Okay, yeah, I had to refresh, which some other people were doing. Okay, you're actually, it's your control because by refreshing, I've lost the majority of the questions. So hopefully we don't have any issues on your side to answer them. So I'll sort of lead you to go through and as I remember, if I don't hear you answer some of the ones I put in there, we'll try and remember them.
Okay, good enough.
Okay.
Is there a difference between what mode C and mode S display on the controller screen? There's what they call adaptation when it comes to equipment like that. By default, your mode C transponder is actually transmitting a mode A code, which is the 4 digits in octal, so 0000 to 7777. And then the mode C is the pressure altitude, so altitude on standard barometric pressure. Somebody else asked about that. How does that show up on the screen? That barometric, like the 2992 altitude, is transmitted to the radar with the mode C reply. And our radar has a bank of altimeter settings across the region, and it corrects for those altimeters. So you're actually not, when you set a different altimeter or a setting in your altimeter window, it's not reporting what you see. It's being corrected elsewhere. It's actually, I heard somebody say that was a bad idea, but it's actually great as a cross-check, because if your altitude is not, if you report an altitude and the controller sees something different, then there's something else to be investigated, and it's either something in our radar system, which I had seen once before as a weather observer put in a wrong altitude by 1 inch of mercury, which threw everything off. But anyway, also if an aircraft system has an issue, it's a good cross-check against it. But mode S transponders can transmit so much more that it could be useful. I know, for example, maybe not so much in your, in your little Cessnas or something, but if you have, well, actually maybe so. If you have an autopilot that has an altitude selector on it. Some avionics suites will actually transmit as part of the Mode S reply the altitude selector value that you have in there. So if you have 5,000 set, the radar could actually see it. In Canada, that doesn't happen yet. The radar sites are not capable of seeing that information just yet. But the information that you can get from Mode S goes far beyond what Mode C can transmit. Next question I see is, once tower has cleared me into the zone for purpose of landing, then I have a radio failure. Will the tower expect me to join the circuit and full stop land or maintain circuit altitude? Okay. So you presumably, when you check in, the tower tells you runway 34, winds 360 at 5, altimeter 29 or 87, cleared left base. If that's what he told you to do, I would fly left base. If he did not give you circuit joining instructions, then you should technically go overhead the field and join as if it's a no communications thing. Keep your transponder on 7600 from the time you recognize the comm failure till the time you get on the ground and leave the runway. Absolutely. You would join the circuit and you would actually descend on base leg, final, whatever, and certainly look for the green light from the tower. Somebody else, I saw a question when I was going through earlier, asked about the light gun. How many times did I use that? I was in Halifax Tower for 2 years, and I used the light gun 3 times in that period. And there were 2 of them that I wasn't even sure if this was a necessity. It just seemed like an aircraft took off first thing in the morning. It was still not quite daylight. And I noticed his transponder shut off. And, well, that is interesting. And then it looks like he's turning around. Okay, well, maybe something's happened. Maybe he's lost electrics or something like that. So I turned on the runway lights and I got the light gun out. And sure enough, the pilot called me after he got on the ground and told me that he had an electrical fire and had to shut off everything. So it was good that I was paying attention, and he was happy to see the green light. There are very few total communication failures these days. The more modern equipment is much more robust than the old stuff was, so it just doesn't happen as often. I think I answered the one on squawking ident. Target flashes on our screen. Okay, when you leave a control area, they say change en route. How long do you wait to change the frequency? When the controller gives you that frequency change to en route frequencies, you're good to go. You can change anytime. There's no need to wait. Yes, I can certainly post my email again. I'll put it in the chat there. mo@xlii.ca. So that should be in there. Okay, I think I lost some of them myself. Maybe they were just in there too long. Clarify what the NOTAM Series H was. I did reply to Rory Filer's question on the NOTAM Series H. Now, Canada changed over to a format of NOTAM reporting that's much more in line with what ICAO recommends. And in the process of that, they changed it all up. If you search for NOTAM Series Nav Canada, you should find a document on the briefing of the transition to the new NOTAM format. It's a long document. There's a lot of information in it. It's dry. What can you expect? It's an aviation document. But it'll give you answers cryptically, if so, that you should be able to find the answers you're looking for in there. Let's see. I see. Is the phraseology Roger appropriate? Absolutely. You could say Roger, and I'll say this. Don't say Roger that. That sounds like second-rate writing on a poor TV show. They all say copy that and Roger that and all that, but Roger is still a legitimate phraseology. It means you're acknowledging the transmission. This, by the same token, saying Alpha Bravo Charlie is it acknowledges the transmission, and it tells the controller who heard it. We've had a few cases where I talked about expectations from transmissions. We kind of set up in our mind the next thing I hear from the controller should be cleared to land, and then he transmits something, I didn't quite hear it, but I think it's a landing clearance, and I land. The same thing could be said for you're expecting a transmission to come for you, and you hear something directed at somebody else, and you acknowledge it. Well, that tells the controller right away that the wrong pilot acknowledged that that transmission. There's something that has to be fixed. Let's fix it. So I would recommend never saying, just keying the mic and saying Roger. That's too open to error. But keying the mic and saying your call sign, the last 3 letters of it, to acknowledge a transmission is a better way to do it. But Roger is at least not by itself. Roger is still a valid phraseology. I was traveling fast. Terminal did not transfer me to tower. Should I have called terminal? Okay. Yeah. If all's going well, properly. If I'm the terminal controller and you're landing at a tower in my airspace, before you get to the control zone, I should be switching you to the tower frequency. And somebody else asked with flight following / en route surveillance, if you are getting close to another controller's airspace, should I wait for a frequency change from the controller? I think the answer is yes, because that controller is still expecting that you're there. That said, sometimes a controller gets a little distracted. Sometimes the controller gets a little busy. So if you know you're sneaking up on the control zone, you should probably question the controller that you're talking to and say, do you want me over to tower? Just a quick transmission like that. And you'll probably get a half apologetic or some kind of answer saying, yeah, contact tower now, sorry. Or maybe they won't even say sorry. I mean, air traffic controllers I know are frequently impatient, but yeah, if you know you're coming up on the border of an airspace, just question the controller you're with. If you switch over without telling him, he might go looking for you like 10 seconds after you left, and then I can't find you. Okay, so I'm flight following Class B. It requested me to climb to 17,000. I canceled flight following due to a CB that would have taken me. Yep, that's an important thing. What should have happened here? So if you're in Class B airspace and a controller asks you to climb or descend or turn to a heading or changes a routing, and all of that, any of that would take you into adverse weather conditions, don't do it. Let the controller know that you have an obstacle in your way that you can't fly into. And whether you're IFR or VFR, by the way, and not just VFR, but let the controller know that you can't take the clearance and give him the reason, and then he'll come up with a different plan. He or she will come up with a different plan. Let's see. I don't believe, Jim, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe this presentation qualifies as part of a currency program.
Yeah, no, this one is not. It is just one as part of the safety series. The next eligible for airplanes is June. The June presentation will be the next one. Next month is RPAS, which qualifies for those people, but next one for aircraft is June.
All right. All right. What does it mean to ATC when they have passed traffic and the pilot responds with, we have traffic on the TCAS, but the pilot does not have traffic in sight? To a controller, seeing the traffic on TCAS is not a useful call because there's nothing I can do. If we talk about pointing out traffic for successive visual approaches. So if you're IFR and you're on a vector or whatever, you see the traffic, or the controller tells you you're number 2, follow 727 at your 11 o'clock, 5 miles, advise traffic in sight. If you say I have them on TCAS, the controller can't do anything with that. He just has to carry on as he's going. But if you say traffic in sight, now we can do something. And the same would apply to VFR. Having traffic on TCAS or your for-flight display, however you're getting to see that, is not the same to a controller as seeing it out the window. There's nothing I can do with a report of traffic on TCAS. Saw another one there. Question might have gotten lost. Yeah, I do remember this one, Steve Garner. What is the proper call when handed from one controller over to another when flight following? So we're going to take this in the en route sense. You've departed, you left tower, you're talking to an en route controller now, and then he's going to switch you to another controller. He'll give you the frequency change, and your check-in now, you don't have to go through the whole bells and whistles that you did with talking to the first IFR controller, because presumably he's been set up on data. So you can just check in and say, Moncton Center, Alpha Bravo Charlie. And that he now knows who he, well, I guess some would call that initial contact with a new controller. So maybe the Cessna Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie. Having been there in that, if I know you're on my frequency, great. And probably the next thing you'll hear from me is Alpha Bravo Charlie Moncton Center, Fredericton altimeter is, something like that. But it's you don't have to give the whole song and dance when you're changing over to a new controller. Fly a 1946 Taylor craft, no electrics, so no transponder, and it's tube and fabric construction. You will not likely be seen on radar with that aircraft. The tubes, just going on radar theory, it might almost resonate like an antenna. So yeah, there's a possibility if you're in an area with primary radar coverage. And I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent here because I don't know how many pilots know the difference between primary and secondary surveillance radar. Primary surveillance radar means it's the bigger antenna, and a blast of radiation is sent out in a given direction, and whatever reflects from the aircraft comes back, and that calculates the azimuth and distance of the aircraft. So that's primary radar. Secondary is just the transponder return. If your aircraft is small and made mostly of composites, even if it's like a Cessna 150 without a transponder, if you're any real distance from a primary radar, you're not going to show up very well. The bigger the aircraft, the better it's seen, and the further away from the antenna it'll be seen. I watched an AN 124 take off at a Halifax without a transponder, and the limit, it's digitally limited, the primary radar, to 100 miles from this particular antenna, and I watched them all the way out, no problem. I had talked to a Cessna 150, like I said, and this guy was only about, say, 10 or 12 miles from the radar antenna. I couldn't see him. So that Taylor craft is probably not likely to be seen on radar. If you have something with ADSB, now you can, it's my understanding that some of these units you can actually get battery powered. And if that can be seen by ADSB from above, then great. When that world comes in, you'll be able to be seen. Back to a question I saw earlier, which I don't see there now. Do you need antennas above and below? For the Americans, they're using a different form of ADSB. They're using frequency 978 megahertz, and I'm trying to think that there's other terminology to go with it. It's not getting to me.
UAT.
UAT, yes. That needs an antenna from beneath because they have strewn, I don't know, 7 million antennas across the countryside down there. And that is like a transponder antenna. The radar is almost always below the airplane. I mean, things are going well. But with Aireon, the thing that NAV Canada is using and hoping to expand is the antenna. The satellites are obviously all above. So in an ideal world, you have what they call antenna diversity, meaning it can be seen from above and below. I know there are some manufacturers that are trying to play with it. Instead of literally having an antenna on the top of your fuselage and a separate one on the bottom of your fuselage, little nav light replacements where they sit in the tail of your aircraft for the white light, and they actually have an antenna above and below this little unit. And apparently some of these things are checking out very well. both with the American system and with the Canadian system. So those might be another option that's available, short of rewiring your whole airplane and installing another antenna around it. That's something that you'd have to investigate with the manufacturers of your aircraft type and the antenna, just to be sure.
Yeah, the ADSB is a huge subject right now, Mike. We can go down that rabbit hole, but you're exactly correct. Interestingly, UAVionics, their tail light dipole antenna was approved STC'd for a number of aircraft in the last week or so.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, so that is going to be something that is available. As far as the implementation, the mandate, how it's all going to play out in Canada is still subject to a lot of discussion.
That's the sort of thing I can't speak to.
Yeah, at the policy level. So those of you out there that are concerned about it, keep in touch with the eFlight, the weekly notices, messages, the magazine. We are actively talking with Transport Canada and Nav Canada to try and come up with the right information for everybody on what's going on. So great topic, maybe something for another seminar somewhere down the road. But we're going to take up all your time if we really dive down that hole. So
I can't speak to that much more than I already have said, and it's not that I'm afraid to; it's that I honestly don't know. As an air traffic controller, I was simply using the tools that they gave me, and maybe fighting for more tools sometimes. But I was not involved in policy. You know, they might have asked us a question: "Hey, do you want this, or do you want to see this?" But whether that goes anywhere, it's way above my pay grade.
Yeah, and you know what? From a COPA perspective, we see lots of benefit in ADSB. We'd also like to see a lot more of the possible benefits for the members at the same time. So
absolutely,
there's lots of discussion still to be held. So those of you that are out there, those discussions are continuing. So I'll let you back onto your topic so that we could spend all night talking about that.
Yeah, very good. So somebody asked, if I'm in flight following, do I have to do anything as I reach my destination before I descend? It comes down to the classification of airspace you're in. If you're in Class E airspace, and I used to see this a lot, is a pilot would presume that when they're talking to air traffic control, they are being controlled as opposed to being provided a service like an information service. So in Class E airspace, you are VFR, you're in command. You decide when to descend, you decide when to turn, you decide to do all that. So you don't need a clearance to start down if you're in Class B airspace. Now, Class E airspace. If you're in Class B, you do have to get a clearance to descend. Class D airspace, you should call before you start. But technically speaking, in Class D, if you haven't been restricted, actively told by a controller, not below 4,000 feet, then you can descend when you're ready, but you should call and tell them that you're descending so they know what's going on. That way, if they see somebody coming out, climbing the opposite direction, they can give you a traffic point out or something like that, because otherwise, you said 4,500, they said 3,500, and they're not expecting you to descend right into them. But if you say, I'll be descending in 1 minute, they can say, oh, well, in that case, there's traffic here. Just hold up at 4,500 until I tell you. Then you say, I see the traffic. They'll say, yeah, descend when you're ready. If you see them, that's good. So yeah, I think I've pretty much covered that. Your Class E, you're on your own. You can just say what you're doing if you're still talking to the controller. And if at any time, if you're in Class E airspace, you're done talking to the controller, you want to go do your own thing, you can simply say, I'm done with, how would you say it? I'd like to cancel en route surveillance. And the controller will say, Roger, change to en route frequency. Have a nice night. Asking for clarification regarding Mode C altitude transmission as being standard atmosphere while pilots are flying local altimeter setting. Okay, so the radar will take a broad area, and it's kind of like, I'll try to use an analogy that we would do without thinking about the radar for a second. Fredericton Airport and Halifax Airport are about 100 miles apart, and St. John is about a quarter of the way along, we'll say. And in theory, you take off Fredericton going to Halifax, you're going to be on the Fredericton altimeter setting, then you'll hit the St. John area and you put on the St. John altimeter setting, and then you go to Halifax and you put your Halifax altimeter setting. Practically speaking, rather than transfer or talk to an airplane out of Fredericton and give them the St. John altimeter for 5 minutes until he's in around Halifax traffic, we would do it a little more practically and say, if they're not interfering with anybody in the St. John area, we just leave them on the Fredericton altimeter setting until he gets into traffic with where Halifax is more relevant. That's kind of what the radar would do. It would have an altimeter setting from every station that it has in the region, and it would put that into a data field. And then every airplane that's flying would move from one area to another, and the radar would correct whatever it gets from your transponder based on the altimeter setting it had for that, what they called as a tile in the tile set. So you could actually watch this if, say, there was a dramatic difference between one altimeter, one pressure in this airport and another over here, as is often the case, like when that hurricane remnant comes through or a really strong front. You could actually watch that an aircraft on this altimeter setting would be cruising along at 5,000 feet, and as soon as he crossed that imaginary line, he might jump to 5,400. And he'd look at that and say, yeah, I know he didn't climb the 400 feet. Hey, airplane, here's the new altimeter setting for the next site. And he would set it, and you'd see him come down to 5,000. So all of the aircraft are reporting the altitudes based on the same setting, which is 2992. And then the radar does the conversion on the ATC side, and the little setting window on your altimeter does the correction on the pilot side. And that's why I say it's a good cross-check. You actually have two systems looking at it and correcting two slightly different ways. And that's why that's my opinion as to why I think it was a good idea. I think I answered that question with a lot more words than were necessary, but that is my habit. Do I prefer that you file by phone or CB?
That may be outside of you.
Yeah, for an air traffic controller's perspective, it is all exactly the same. If you file by and talk to radio by phone, if you do it online, we're going to get the same thing. So that really doesn't matter for us. Is the use of the word copied also valid as Roger is? Yeah. I personally like just the responding with the call sign, because that both acknowledges a transmission and tells me who is acknowledging it. There are two aspects of it. And notice that custom question is not slated. It is important. Yes, Peter, I saw that earlier. Customs handling has always been really convoluted from an air traffic control perspective. I've had the misfortune of trying to deal with Canada Customs on the phone on behalf of a pilot, because like you say, you're cruising along and everything's good, and then you find out, oh, it's not good anymore, and something has to be changed. And customs is always the hardest thing to change. So you're frustrated by it. Trust me, any air traffic controller or flight service specialist who has delved into it as well has also been frustrated by it. The best you can do is relay your request and see if the air traffic controllers can help. Usually, like my experience, we had a supervisor in the room, and they were, I could flag him down and say, can you talk to customs about this guy? And sometimes it would take an extraordinary amount of time to get through, but we tried anyway. I often fly at my cottage between North Bay, Pembroke, and Muskoka in the Algonquin Park area. My radio only allows me to be on one frequency. I'm VFR in an amphibian. Am I best on 1267 or 1215 when far from airports, let's say 3,000 feet? The books will recommend 126.7, and for that reason, I would say 126.7 as well. I do know for a general statement that the regional airliners will not normally monitor 120.15 when they're cruising along, maybe on the longer legs, but a lot of the regional legs just aren't long enough for it. The high level traffic, the guys 35,000, 40,000 feet, many of those will monitor 120.15 on a regular basis. And I remember a question I saw from somebody earlier, I don't know if they're still here, that what is meant by on guard. That was guard. It was more of a military term for the emergency frequency. So if you're transmitting on 120.15 accidentally, a pilot may call out and say that's on guard. But that's what on guard means. I think you're probably best on 126.7 if you only have one frequency that you can monitor. As a controller, what comment do you want to hear from a pilot who is new and needs you to talk slow? Somebody else asked the question earlier, and I forgot to get to that one. Just say it plain English. There is an official phraseology: speak slower, and that's what you're asking them to do. And don't be shy about it. You might hear a controller maybe be a little bit impatient with you, but that's his problem, not yours. You're asking for what you need, and that's the job that this controller is supposed to do for you. So if you need them to talk slower, feel free to ask. If there's no real workload, considering all the info that is in, oh, I missed that. Okay, in the system, including the name of the system. I think this question might have gotten chunked up a little bit there.
Yeah, Peter had an earlier comment and question that probably should actually come out that we lost here. Part of it was that particularly in Southern Ontario, there seems to be a habit of a lot of VFR pilots.
Yes, I remember
reading back communications from ATC, which
everything
takes up time and everything. So
yeah,
I'll let you make the comment. I have my opinion.
I would love to fix that as strongly as he would. The reality is, like I said, everything about an air traffic controller's job is communication. If you take his radio away from him, he can't do anything. There's, maybe make a phone call or something, but everything is on the radio. So when I have a pilot that's taking a long time to say something, it ties up the frequency. So my big thing is if somebody else has a real serious issue, like maybe another pilot has an emergency, he's just had an engine failure and he needs some help, and somebody else is giving me a good song and dance about how the fog that was forecast isn't actually here, it's a much nicer day. Granted, most pilots don't do that, and I'm thankful for it. But any long-winded readbacks or something like that, acknowledgements are almost always better. And I'll say this again, if you think you got something and you're not sure, read it back. If you got it and you're certain of it, just acknowledge it. Unless it's a hold short instruction, then definitely read that back. But reading back traffic information or weather sequences, not required. I'll see if there's any other questions in here. Yeah, ADSB, so confusing. I will agree with that statement. I'm actually in discussions leading up to this with Jim and Sharon and Chris from Nav Canada about it. I got the impression that there was an awful lot more going on than I even knew. I thought my side of it was frustrating. Somebody asked, Roger as an acknowledgement by the military only? No, Roger is an official phraseology, official word with a meaning. But yeah. What's your vector, Victor? My favorite movie of all time. Long before I was an air traffic controller or even had a pilot's license, it was my favorite movie. They must have had so much fun making that. Okay, good. Somebody got my answer about the NOTAM series, because in my presentation, CYR 724 was C Series H. And that was a relatively new change when Canada went to the ICAO formatting of NOTAMs. So I sent him a link to Nav Canada stuff there. Do I see anything else?
I've got a couple more in the questions
Yeah,
here.
go ahead.
I'm not sure if you're just reading through the chat or if you're on the QA side.
I did the Q&A first, and I'm just going back through the chat to see if anybody put something
so you're
in there.
catching some of the ones that we lost for sure.
Yeah.
There are a couple more in the Q&A here now.
Go for it.
What were here? Great to hear from a ATC expert. Thanks, Mike, was one. Very informative and interesting. How are transponder codes assigned?
There's only 4,096 of these codes available, and at any given time, if you look at FlightAware or any of those, you'll see thousands of airplanes. So what they do, every air traffic control facility, and when I talk about that level, it's the center. So Moncton Center, Gander Center, Toronto Center, Boston Center. They'll have, generally speaking, two groups of codes: local codes, which means aircraft departing in the Moncton FIR and landing in the Moncton FIR. And then there are external codes, which are departing the Moncton FIR going somewhere else. And this is a kind of, it has to move a little bit with history, but they look at how many aircraft are generally flying on these routes at any given time, and how far they're going, and it's a really complicated procedure just for North America alone, but they try to coordinate. If we gave this block of codes to Moncton, and this is where Moncton's traffic usually flies to, we'll say we'll give them 3601 to 3677 as one of their external blocks. Since none of those aircraft from Moncton fly to Mexico, that's a bad example, Los Angeles, they might use the same code 3600 in Los Angeles as another one, so because those FIRs rarely cross. But Moncton and Toronto FIRs, they wouldn't use 3600 in Moncton and 3600 in Toronto because there would be aircraft assigned the same code. So they try to coordinate blocks that won't overlap. And the easiest ones are the internal ones, because an airplane taking off Moncton and going to Halifax is in the air for half an hour and is never visible to any radar in Boston Center, never visible to anything in Montreal or Gander for that matter. And that code won't interfere with anybody. So it's a convoluted process. But the systems, they get their assigned codes, the internal, external, look at the flight plans and automatically assign them. When a code is, let's say an Air Canada lands in Halifax, that as soon as he's confirmed on the ground, the system is told about it, and then that code is recycled for the next flight.
Okay, can you comment on radio failure and use of cell phone?
Oh, cell phones have been wonderful for that aspect, because there's nothing worse in a flow of traffic than having one aircraft with a radio failure, because what's he going to do? I've had this discussion on a number of occasions, and the way most air traffic controllers will treat it when somebody squawks 7600, or maybe the pilot hasn't even noticed it yet. Maybe he's just noticed the radio's kind of quiet and just waiting for somebody to call him. Having that one aircraft with that comm failure really throws a wrench into everything. Most controllers will just get everybody out of that aircraft's way and see what he does. In Moncton Center, the comm failures that I saw actually were more likely to be on ATC's side. They had backups that we could key up fairly quickly. So an ATC related comm failure was rarely lasted longer than 20 or 30 seconds at the most. But when a pilot did experience a comm failure, the idea of pilots having cell phones in the cockpit, oh great, you call that number that's in the Canada Flight Supplement, and it might take a couple of minutes for the manager to walk to the other end of the building and say, hey, look, I got this pilot calling me east of Moncton with a comm failure. Are you the right guy? Yeah, here, I'll take the phone, talk to him. Okay, this is what we'll do for you. And now I can coordinate with him on the phone while I coordinate with the other pilots on the radio. So it makes it back to a seamless operation, really. Yeah, cell phones have been great. And not to mention the GPS in a cell phone too.
Yeah, where am I going, right? Next one, any special procedures to fly over U.S. airspace en route to a destination?
Yes. It's my understanding that if you're flying, what was the question? Just overflying U.S. airspace to another destination, Canada, or to a destination in the U.S.?
It appears to be en route, so overflying.
Okay,
so say Quebec to Halifax. So you're going over.
Yeah. Actually, that's a perfect example. Very common one. It's my understanding that since 911, I know after that it was put in place that if you're crossing an international boundary, they wanted to have you on a flight plan, which would be required for that kind of leg anyway. But they also want you to be talking to ATC at the very least to get a transponder code. Even if you take off, you clear the zone and switch on route frequencies, at least you keep that transponder code on your flight through the whole way through, because Moncton system would pass that information to Boston. Boston system would then get it, pass it on to Montreal, so everybody knew who everybody was. At that time, everybody was really sensitive to it, and if a 1200 code crossed a boundary, there were F-15 scrambled. I remember 2 incidents where that happened along our border with Boston. But I think that's still in place. I don't know for sure. I'm
pretty sure that if you're crossing over the actual border, you need to be on a flight plan and get get a code.
Certainly a flight plan, but I'm pretty sure needing a code is still in there too.
Yeah. Next one, I may actually even be able to answer this. Do you think I can have service in French if I have difficulties to speak or understand the conversation if I go to New Brunswick or Ontario? There are designated areas where there is bilingual service. That is available in the CFS, I believe, has the listing of
anything in the province of Quebec and going to Ottawa. That's my understanding of the only places that you're allowed to speak French. That said, in New Brunswick, we're a bilingual province, and I would say 40% of the people I worked with were, if not French born, be it Acadian or Quebec, they were at least quite capable of speaking French. It's technically not really proper for a controller in Moncton Centre to speak French to a pilot because it's not in those designated areas that Jim just referred to. But I do know on a couple of occasions the English was so weak that either the controller sitting there knew enough French, or we got somebody back from a break who could speak French and talk to the pilot. So it was actually done in the interest of flight safety. But if you're in either of those areas, yes, you absolutely can. Like the Quebec and Ottawa, you can request service in French. New Brunswick or Ontario, probably not. You might get a friendly controller who's willing to do it, but that's technically not proper.
We actually had a similar question earlier on that I now remember as well, which was English in Quebec and hearing French, and what can I do if I'm in a situation talking to ATC and
that's a tough one. Like I can think of so many cases from my own limited flying where hearing other pilots make position reports before the controller could get to me to tell me about something, I was already aware of it and I was already seeing it and doing something about it to avoid other traffic or something. That language barrier has consistently come up as an issue in Canadian provision of air traffic services. I don't know if there's much I can recommend for that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously inside Quebec or in the Ottawa area, the controllers all are bilingual.
Yeah.
So if you are talking to any air traffic people, whether it's flight service or it's ATC, they need to be able to provide services in both languages. So if you don't understand what's being said, then well, the prudent thing would be to ask that air traffic person, what is there any?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we've got that one. Is there a difference in what to expect when in contact with a military air traffic control unit like COMOX?
In theory, no. In practice, yeah. I did my flight training actually at CFB Shearwater when it was still a fixed wing base, and the air traffic control that I learned listening to them, and the stuff that I got from Halifax Tower when I would venture the odd time into their airspace, it seemed like two different worlds. But in theory, they're trained to the same standards. Now they will have certain things like at the military bases, you'll have arrestor gear. And if you fly out of civilian airports all your life and you go into someplace, a military aerodrome for the first time, you might hear something said like departure end cable is up. Well, what's the departure end cable? And all I can tell you is don't go over it too fast. You can damage your airplane. But there are certain pieces of equipment like that that might be like a PAR, precision approach radar. That's something that is available at most of the military fields that isn't available at a civilian field. That was good for the days where a VFR got caught in cloud and needed a controller to talk him down because he didn't have an ILS or anything, or nowadays everybody has RNAV, so that's so much better. But, you know, yeah, there are some very different procedures at many military bases. But the basics of it should still be the same. Cleared takeoff, cleared to land, taxi, all those sorts of things should still be the same.
Okay, last one I have, does recycle my code request after landing mean ATC will keep my code in the system during a brief shutdown of the aircraft?
I'm not really sure what you mean by recycle my code. Let's say if you're I'll say it this way, as far as the code assignments go. If you're taking off from airport A, going to B, going to C, and then back to A, so a nice little round robin. And at B and C, you're going to stop for 20 minutes, maybe get a burger or fill your tanks or something. If your flight plan is still A to A, I would keep that code on your transponder until that flight plan is ultimately closed. The old way of thinking, like prior to even me getting into the system, was if you were assigned a code by ATC and you were told radar service terminates, that's when you would set 1200, and you could forget about that code because it wasn't going to be assigned to you again. Even on the way back, they might give you a different one. But these days, the way the flight plans are handled by the system, I don't think it's written anywhere. I tried looking this one up at one point and I couldn't find anything. But the way I think it should be done by pilots is to keep that code on your transponder so long as you're on the same flight plan. When you land at your final destination, that's the end of your plan. That's when you might set it back to 1200 just to remind yourself not to take off with that code because you might scoop somebody's flight plan on the way out next time. Yeah, somebody just asked, do I recall at the start not to go standby when changing codes? That is, as a controller, that's my personal preference, because when you change it to standby, I lose your target. Now, realistically speaking, how long is it going to take you to change the code and activate it again? I can only remember one case where a pilot turned off his transponder to change to a new code, and it didn't come back on, so I had nothing to go on. So maybe that's a little bit of paranoia in the back of my head. I do remember a discussion about that amongst some pilots over at the Moncton Flight College around the time that this happened, and everybody was very staunchly set on their rule. I always put it to standby so I don't cycle through a code. And somebody else said, I'll always enter the codes from the last digit first, because as long as I don't hit 00, it doesn't matter what I set up front accidentally. It's not going to hit one of the emergency codes. Yeah, all valid. But if you really feel that it's necessary to hit standby, I don't think I would lose any sleep over it.
Okay, I think that's all we have for now. Anyways, we do have somewhere in this crazy system of tonight that we've had lots of technical difficulties.
I'm glad I wasn't in them.
Right. Yeah, yours actually has been all right. all the questions and all the chat will have been recorded, so we will go through and we'll take a look and see if there's any questions, you know, of importance that need to be answered. To everybody who stayed on half an hour over our time that we were planning, thank you very much for your attention and your interest. Very much appreciated. We do enjoy putting these on, and we look forward to doing them each month. Thank you very much, Mike, and both Adrian and Todd have left, but thanks to them as well. That's really all we have. One last reminder that the Copa Fly-In is in June in Saint-Jean, so anybody who's interested and able to get there, we encourage that you come out. There will actually be a presentation and a recurrent eligible presentation at the Fly-In, as well as a regular seminar online like this in June. So to everybody, as I say, who stayed on, thank you very much appreciated. Lots of good comments back to Mike about good presentation. So thank you very much, Mike. We will be looking for you possibly to give another one on something, maybe on IFR phraseology or something down the road. So
I would be quite happy to do it. I love doing this sort of thing. And as you can see, I'm happy to talk at great length. Thanks for having me.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. Thanks everybody for being on, and thanks for the all the comments. We look forward to seeing you in the months to come.
All right. Good night.
Good night.